This computer recording. Okay, we're good to go. Right then. So, chapters 3 and 4 of the Yoga Sutras, we generally don't study them because, for our own personal practice, they're not so relevant. Chapter 2 is the Kriya, is what we're supposed to do if we wish to imbibe yoga and make it a part of our lives, or make our lives part of yoga. So chapter 2, chapter 1 is the goal, samadhi. So then chapter 2 is the Kriya. What do you do? What actions do we take if we're interested in the goal of yoga? And then chapter 3 is Vibhuti Pada, which are Vibhutis, siddhis. And chapter 4 is, well, a chunk of it is a response to a certain type of Buddhism that must have been prominent at the time, because Patanjali doesn't really, unlike other schools, he doesn't really engage in debate or dialogue with other schools, unlike Vedanta, unlike Nyaya, unlike Mimamsa, and well, certainly those three, especially, are engaged in dialectic. They're engaged in debate, really. They're establishing their position in contradistinction to other positions, so they engage the other positions. Patanjali doesn't do that. Atha Yoga Anushasanam, the utter, you could take the first word, utter, to mean, well, once you've done all of that, you've cleared the ground. That's what Nyaya calls it. Philosophical debate, philosophical engagement. You clear the ground of opposing points of view until you find, you reach your siddhanta, the point of view that you ascribe to. Is there an Atman? Is the Atman eternal? Is it momentary? Is it individual? Is it infinite? Is it Ishvara? Is there an Ishvara? Is there not an Ishvara? Is Ishvara the highest causal truth, cause of all causes, or is it sort of secondary to some transpersonal Brahman? Once you've figured out your position in all of that, in all those possibilities, that Indian philosophy, like any rich intellectual tradition anywhere in the world, you have a wide array of possibilities. So some commentators take the first word, atta. You done all that? You know where you're situated? Have you situated yourself on a path of moksha, on a yoga path, after deliberation, after considering why you're on that path and not on some other path? Have you done all of that? Atta Yoga Anushasanam. So Patanjali doesn't engage in interaction with other schools, except in the fourth pada, which suggests that particular school, it's only one school. Normally, the different, the so-called 6 schools of Indian philosophy, they don't just engage one school, they engage whatever it is that's threatening or challenging their position. So Vedanta has the whole of the second, chapter, number a dozen different schools. Likewise, Mimamsa, Nyaya tends to be mostly against, Buddhism, and so is the fourth pada. So we'll get to that. And today we're going to do the Vibhuti Pada. So let's start with our invocations. Let's bring our teachers to mind. Remember that we're simply participating in ancient lineages. This is the Indian mode of pedagogy. You try not to insert your ego. You don't try to be clever. You don't try to be witty. Nor do you try to contribute. What is there to contribute if truth is eternal? And all the schools, of course, hold their truths to be eternal. So then what are you contributing? If something is eternal, then it just is. So there's nothing, right? Isness, sat. It has sat. It has isness. And isness never changes. So what are you going to contribute? So then what do the commentators do? They simply unpack that. They transmit it, they unpack it. And if they make a contribution, it's only to bring it up to date not to change the truths, but to engage whatever intellectual currents are extant in their day and age. So for us, that would be neuropsychology. If we wanted to be part of the yoga tradition and perpetuate it, the Purva Paksha is the opposing point of view, the other point of view, the non-yogic point of view, if you're representing yoga, or the non-Vedanta point of view, if you're representing Vedanta, within Vedanta, the non-Vishishta or the non-Advaita. So our opposing point of view would be material, neurological, cognitive science that claims that consciousness is an epiphenomenon of some kind of material entity or combination of entities. So that would be we would have to engage that consciousness studies, or anyone considering themselves to be, situated in the lineage of yoga and perpetuating it, they have to make it relevant to that day and age. So, so therefore, we bring our teachers to mind just to remind ourselves that we're not adding anything new. We try not to be clever. We try to push aside our ego, because then the ego blocks the transmission. If we want people to adore us or to respect us, then our ego's blocking that the eternal truths from coming through. So we have to be like transparent mediums. So teaching is we shouldn't even think of ourselves as teachers, frankly. We're students. We're all students. I mean, even just assuming the label teacher is an act of arrogance. Think about it. We're students, and it just so happens that some of us have studied one particular thing for longer than others, and others have studied something else for longer than us. And so we, just by dint of time, we gain a little more familiarity with that thing. That's all. So but there are great souls. So we bring them to mind, and if you care to do that, bring your teachers to mind, and we simply request their presence there. We request them to enthuse our intelligence, to inspire our intelligence, so that we can actually transmit the teachings as faithfully as possible without our egos interfering, which is very hard to do. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshor Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swamini Te Namine. Namaste Sarasvati Deve Gauravani Pacharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Desha Tarine. Akanda Mandalakaram Yena Vyaptam Characharam Tat Padam Darshitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasati Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate. Tapta Kanchana Gaurange Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hare Priya. Apravitra Pavitro Va Sarvavasta Gatopi Va Yasmaret Mandrikaksham Sa Bhayabhyantara Shuchahi. The Patanjali mantra, my friends, some of you know it. If you do Iyengar yoga, you recite it at the beginning of class. Yogena Chittasya Adena Vacham Malam Sharirasya Chavaidyakena Yo Apakarot Tam Prabharamuninam Patanjalim Pranjalir Anatosmi Abaho Purusha Akaram Shankha Chakra Asi Dharinam Sahasrashirsham Shvetam Pranamami Patanjalim. Okay, my friends, if you're just new Chapter 3 is not a great place to start your studies of the Yoga Sutras. It's weird. By which I mean not anything a derogative or weird means it's something that's completely different. It's not normal in terms of the claims that it makes. That doesn't make them wrong or wrong. It's so maybe maybe I shouldn't have used the term weird, but it's not. Well, how about we start with this verse? 336. I beg your pardon. 337. So the third pada, the third chapter, is about a big chunk of it is about the siddhis, siddhayaha. That's plural for siddhi. So we're going to meet some. When I say weird, I probably should have said some, super normal, non-normal, and very grandiose. Again, that's a little bit loaded word, but I don't mean it in any loaded sort of way. If Patanjali claims you can know every single atom, not atom, subatomic, irreducible particle in the universe, well, that's certainly grand claim to be. Grandiose has a sense of bragging and dishonesty. So I shouldn't use the term grandiose, but that's an enormously grand claim to make. Well, we're going to run into claims like that then in chapter 3. So if this is your first study of the Yoga Sutras, by all means sit in, but you should really go to chapter 2, chapter 1 and chapter 2 to actually study what yoga is. Because Patanjali is going to say this chapter 3 is what yoga isn't actually. And why do I say that? 336, 337. These siddhis, they are upasargaha. They are obstacles, samadhav. Who is doing Sanskrit? We've got a Sanskrit course going on. Who's doing Sanskrit? Ellen, are you doing Sanskrit? Well, what is samadhav? It's samadhau. It's the locative of samadhi. And then because of sandhi, it becomes samadhav. So there are obstacles in the matter of, by the way, my friends, you should all be doing Sanskrit. Come on, Claire is up there. She'll tell you about how and there's Alice. Alice, you should all be doing Sanskrit. We got no business reading the Yoga Sutras unless. Sorry, I'm being a bit radical here. We should feel free to join our course or to download the videos on Sanskrit, my friends. Don't tell yourself the story you can't do it. So these siddhis are upasarga, because it's plural. They're obstacle, samadhau, which becomes samadhav. For samadhi, they're obstacles, they're kleshas. These siddhi, the whole of chapter 3, they're upasargas, they're obstacles in samadhi. And they're only siddhis, vyuttane, for those whose minds are outwardly going. So they are siddhis in the matter of outward going minds, but they're obstacles for samadhi. And what's yoga? Certainly not an outward going mind. Yoga is an internal, right? Chitta vritti nirodha. So then why does Patanjali spend a whole chapter and also bits and pieces in chapter 2? Why does he spend a whole chapter? I used to think, and by the way, before I finish that sentence, let's just solidify this point. How do you get these siddhis? What's the first verse of chapter 4, my friends? How do you get them? The siddhis, they are born in 5 different ways. One of them is samadhi, fair enough, which is what yogis are interested in, when samadhi, when the mind is completely nirodha, and there is nothing, no longer any object on the landscape of the chitti shakti, of consciousness. When there's no objects, then tada kim bhavati drashtu svarupe vasthanam, then the sea abides in its own nature. Vritti sarupya metaratra, otherwise it's absorbed in the vrittis. So the goal of yoga is certainly not outward going. The absolute and utter contrast. It is complete cessation of all external outgoingness, such that consciousness can abide in its own nature. But their siddhis do manifest And there's loads of stories of great yogis who, they have siddhis, but they're absolutely not interested in them. They certainly don't display them for cheap adoration and distinction, for fame and adulation. Now, we should also make a contrast between yoga, Vedanta, and the class, those kinds of schools, and the Tantra, the cluster of schools that go by the name of Tantra or Hatha or Siddha or Kundalini. Those clusters of schools, those schools are more interested in cities and sort of physiological, supernormal occurrences. So that certainly you'll find much more interest in those, and even they're even make more a fundamental part of the. You can call them tantra traditions, you can call them siddha traditions, you can call them hatha traditions, you can call them kundalini traditions. The common denominator of them all is that the practice is to raise the kundalini up the sushumna. So that cluster of traditions, they could be Shaiva, they could be Vaishnava, they could be Shakta with the goddess. But the sine qua non, the defining feature of them is the Sushumna rising up the spinal column. So you call them Tantra, call them Hatha, call them Siddha, call them a number of different names. That's not classical yoga. It's not Vedanta. It's not, Vaishnava. Okay. So we should make it, everything sort of gets merged when it comes to the West into kind of a hodgepodge. So those traditions, the Kundalini slash Hatha slash Siddha slash Tantra traditions, you can use any of those names, probably a couple more. They're a little bit more interested in the cities. As the Sushumna rises up and it bursts through the chakras, that's supernormal smells, supernormal sounds, and these supernormal occurrences. They're not shunned. And in many ways, they may be signs of progress. That's those traditions, not classical yoga. Classical yoga is only interested in the pure consciousness. Anything else is an upasarga. We just read the verse. An upasarga means an obstacle. So then why does Patanjali spend so much time on them? Well, before we think about that, let's look at the first verse of chapter 4. The cities, are born. How are they born? How'd you get them? Well, samadhi, yes. Janma, by birth. Some entities are born with cities, and the commentators here talk about these celestial beings, the deva. So in the Vedic world, Hindu, Buddhist cosmography, there are all kinds of dimensions, and imperceivable to us. You could have the biggest Hubble bubble in existence. You wouldn't perceive them because they're not made of gross matter. They're made of subtle matter. So the whole universe is not actually just this planet with life, and everything else is a bunch of rocks floating in space. The Hindu, Buddhist, Jain, and actually pretty much every society known to anthropology, the universe is not is full of life, actually. So there are those who are born as celestial beings due to good karma, right? Patanjali calls it jati ayurboga, so that you can get cities if you have very, very, very good karma. You're born as celestial. Celestials have cities. They can teleport. They can just fly through the air. The great sages can just manifest right in front of you. So that's janma. You can get cities from birth. Nothing to do with yoga, or maybe you did yogic practice in a past life. Number 2, Oshadi, herbs, my friends. It doesn't mean you can start puffing on your pipes and they like this on the Lower East Side. I remember I was doing a workshop once down in the Lower East Side with what was his name, and all these Lower East Side, with tats and spikes and earrings, and they were like, "Oh, dude, yeah, chapter 4." That's the only verse they knew in the entire Yoga Sutras. Yeah, chapter 4, verse 1, man. Yeah, Oshadi, that's the herb, that's the sacred herb. Well, maybe, but the commentators take it to be soma, which was a intoxicating beverage known to the ancient Vedic Indo-Aryans. We call them Indo-Aryans. The scholar, the Vedic followers of Vedic culture, linguistically, we call them Indo-Aryans. So they perform these Vedic rituals in the very old texts, and there was a beverage, nobody knows what it is. Already in the first commentary of the Rig Veda centuries ago, the commentator says we don't know what this soma is. But what we do know because of the descriptions in the text, the soma is some kind of a plant with a white fleshy body that gets pulverized and mixed with milk and then drained. So we know a few bits and pieces of it. It gets drained, and then it's offered to Indra, especially loves it, king of the gods. It says Indra has, one of his names is, he drinks 100 lakes. 100 lakes. I mean, you think Britland is bad enough on a Saturday night, but how about Indra drinking 100 lakes of this soma, whatever it is? Okay, so the second way you get cities, and Indra is the king of the gods. He's like Zeus. Gods with a small g. Don't confuse with Ishvara like Shiva or Vishnu. That there are totally other, they're another ontological. They're eternal beings. Whereas you could be an Indra if you do very good karma, and you probably could have. We've probably been Indras in the past. So Indra is just a birth. So the gods have cities. So we're looking at chapter 4, verse number 1. How do you get these cities? They're born of samadhi, right? The yogic way. They're born from birth. So we talked about the gods. They're born from these herbs. So the commentators take that to be soma. Mantra. I mean, in the Vedic sacrifice, if you chant your mantras just right, perfectly, you can control the elements. You can make it rain. You can, that in fact, the Vedic sacrifice perpetuated the cosmos. And it lasted for 2,000 years. Don't think they were stupid. These were people whose abilities in grammar and astronomy and mathematics and philosophy astound us today, and here we are still following a lot of it. So I don't know what to tell you. For 2,000 years, in historical time, I'm talking academic time, or Hindu time, or Vedic time is eternal, perform these Vedic sacrifices. So what do we say about that? Do we say it was when we don't know what to do with something, we call it mythology or a mythic past? That just means we don't know what to do with it. So we stick it into this convenient little box and call it mythic. What the heck does mythic mean? Other than it's not true. That's really what it means. But it's not politically correct anymore to say it's not true. So we just sort of tone it down and we say, oh, it's mythology or a mythic past. Well, how come it was a mythic past then for Brahmins who astound us to this day with their other aspects of their intellectual abilities? Do you think they were so stupid that they didn't see that if you pour ghee in the fire, it didn't rain? Do you think someone didn't say, Yagnavalkya, well, you did a yagya, now it's not raining. You're false. You're just being falsified. Do you think someone wouldn't have said that? So what? Who knows? Are there lost sciences? You can't. That's not philosophically impossible. That there were sciences of mantra that we have lost. That we no longer are able to chant this sound precisely. After all, everything is, in a sense, everything's vibration. They talk about seeding, clouds to make it rain. Well, who's to say? And I'm not saying it's true or false. I'm just saying, out of respect for the Vedic past, who's to say that there weren't sound vibrations that could seed rain? We don't know. But according to this verse, then we're talking about cities. One of the cities is mantra. Mantra is sound vibration. Some mantra is divine presence. A lot of mantra is divine presence, like the great bhakti mantras. And some of it is Vedic chanting. The mantras, originally the term mantra comes from the Vedic hymns. So Agnamehele Purohitam Yagnasyam Devam. They're very beautiful, but very materialistic, actually. They're asking the devas for stuff. But some of those mantras, the claim is made that if you do a Vedic sacrifice and you do it just perfectly right, and you chant your mantras just precisely right, you can make stuff happen, supernormal stuff happen. That's what a siddhi is. That some supernormal something happens. So according to this verse, we're just looking at this verse, my friends, and let me just be clear about my style of teaching, my pedagogic style. It's called phenomenology. When I'm being an academic, I use the label phenomenology, which means you really enter into a tradition. It doesn't mean you accept it, nor does it mean you reject it. You want to understand it, you enter into it. If it says mantras cause rain, you neither accept nor reject. You don't reject it either. You say, okay, mantras, ancient Indians believed that sound vibration could affect cosmological changes. So that's called, you just look at it as a phenomenon. You don't judge it. You don't throw your modern science and your modern whatever theologies at it. You just let it tell its own story. So the story in this verse is that these siddhis are attained in 4 different ways. You could be born a siddha, meaning a deva. You can get supernormal powers by drinking this. Well, it just says Oshadi, but the commentators don't take it to mean some mundane, like marijuana or something, or magic mushrooms, although, lots of books have been written on it, Amarita muscara or whatever. I got that wrong. So the second way is herbs. A third way is mantra. Now here's the tapaha. You can get mystic powers by austerity, intense mental focus. And we have a little bit, we do have people even in our day and age, like Uri, what was his name? Uri Geller, whatever his name, who could bend spoons and stuff. So this is something that potentially, science could observe. But according to this verse, the fifth way of attaining siddhis, but notice out of these 5 ways, only one of them is yoga. The other 4 are not. So now let's let's go back to that 238. Why does Patanjali say they're obstacles? Because I tell you what, I used to think, and I think it perhaps still partly true, that Patanjali is warning the meditator that if you do intense meditation, intense concentration, then weird, and I don't mean that disrespectfully, but let's just say far out stuff can happen. You might start levitating, you might start manifesting supernormal powers, just kind of like unintentionally. You might, and so he's saying, don't get sidetracked, don't take a left turn, keep focusing on your practice. So I used to think that he mentions these siddhis just to say, okay, they're real, they happen, and don't, if they happen to you, don't get sidetracked. I used to think that, and maybe that's still true, but then after I wrote, the book was published, because before the book is published, you're thinking about your book all the time, you get some ideas and you run back and you put it in your book. Once it's published, you can't, it's too late, it's out there. But so after it was published, I thought, I was still thinking about this, and then I had this, I don't know if it's a eureka moment or maybe not, but there were demons, the great asuras of Indian epic, Ravana, who stole Sita from Ram in the whole Ramayana. They're called asuras. And there were some of them, like Ravana, were so powerful that even the devas couldn't combat them, and Vishnu had to incarnate. What does Krishna say in the Gita? Paritranaya sadhunam vinashaya chatushkritam. Right? I come to protect the pious and destroy the dushkritam. So what kind of a dushkritam, a bad guy, requires Bhagavan to come down? It must be a pretty powerful bad guy. Well, those pretty powerful bad guys are called asuras. So Ravana in the Ramayana perhaps is the best known. So then I thought, you know what? And those bad guys, those asuras, are doing something that looks from the outside exactly like what a real yogi is doing. Like Hiranyakasipu stood on one leg, Ekapada Hastasana, for 1,000 years. Didn't move. Talk about tapas. You want tapas? How about that? And the ants built an anthill around him and they consumed his flesh. There was just his prana circulating around his skeleton. Why? He's not interested in the Atman. They wanted power. and they wanted supreme power. And when we read chapter 3, we'll see how these powers, you can know everything in the universe. So therefore that's, and they got it by tapas. So I now think that perhaps one of the reasons, is just my thought, and I'll tell you when it's me and not the commentators. Otherwise, everything is the commentators. I'm just transmitting the commentators. If it's me, I'll just say it's me. That you don't have to take it too seriously. But now I think that Patanjali is saying, look, even the demons have cities. They can get cities. So therefore, there are obstacles to the yogi. Because if you can start, levitating or flying around or being in more places than one or entering other people's bodies or manifesting the strength of an elephant or walking on air, you could get sidetracked. I mean, I'm sure I'd take a few years off and fool around if I had cities and leave my yogic path. I would imagine. So therefore, keep all this in mind as we engage chapter 3. Okay. So first of all, that you can get these cities in 5 different ways, and only one of them is yoga. The rest are mundane. Herbs. How mundane is that? You imbibe some physical substance. What's that got to do with yoga? Mantra, okay, you have to be skilled enough to chant it perfectly, but it's a material skill. Tapaha, completely material. It's just sheer grit, determination. No different from what the Olympics we've just seen. You simply utter complete and utter dedication and determination. Where you can some of these amazing athletes, if they were yogis, they could channel that kind of intensity into their tapas, and according to Patanjali, they could get cities. Okay, so keep all that in mind, my friends. Right, that 5 different ways of getting them, and verse 3:28. That they're of no interest. Let's look at it again, and then we'll go back and start the chapter. Okay, so 3:28, 3:27, 3. What was it? Does anyone remember? Maybe 38. I just
37.
37.
So they. Right, these are cities, siddhayaha, that's plural of city, siddhayaha, as Sanskritist, we now have all these Sanskritists amongst us. These cities, they are cities, yutane, for those whose minds are outward, going out. But they're upasargaha, but they're obstacles, samadho, in samadhi. All right, so why are we doing them? Because they're in the Yoga Sutras, and we are studying the Yoga Sutras, and they're there. So we'll study them, and we'll look at them. So Patanjali leaves us hanging at the end of chapter 2 on this sixth limb of yoga. It's kind of puzzling. I mean, we would sort of think, okay, the 8 limbs of yoga belong in one chapter, and then we start the next chapter on something else. But he finishes, look, 2:55 on pratyahara, right? Pratyahara 2:54. And then he finishes the chapter saying, when your senses are withdrawn, well, that's the highest sense control. Normally, when we're subject to bhoga and raga and the kleshas, our consciousness is flowing out through the senses, and our consciousness is contacting sense objects, right? So our mind, about 2 things: consciousness enveloped in the subtle body, the 2 different things, flowing out through the senses, contacting a sense object. And if that sense object feels good, tastes good, smells good, looks good, it leaves an imprint in the mind, as all sense objects do. And if that's a pleasant imprint, then it resurfaces as a raga, a desire. So pratyahara then is where, well, you don't let consciousness flow out. It's not contacting any sense objects. So you internalize it. And so Patanjali says that's the highest sense control. Just don't let consciousness flow out through the senses. What's higher than that? Tataha, from that, parama bhasha Vashata. That is the Indriyanam. That's the highest Vashata, control of the senses. Okay? And then he ends the chapter. He calls it Sadhana Pada. So, but we're left dangling. We're 2/3 of the way through the 8 limbs. So let's think. Let's well, he's going to give an explanation himself, Patanjali. So let's kick off after that preamble, and here we are. Verse 1. Desha bandash chitasya dharana. So dharana is of the mind, fixing on one place. The fixing on one place of the mind. So your mantra comes highly recommended, as we know. Tasya vachikaha pranavaha to japa. Japa is the first on the list of Patanjali's objects to fix the mind. You've got to fix the mind on something. Don't confuse this with mindfulness. Nothing to do with mindfulness. Mindfulness is of another tradition where you don't fix the mind. It all gets mishmushed in the West, understandably, and commodified and commercialized. But Patanjalian meditation and Hindu meditation in general is fixing the mind on one thing. And by far the most common thing is a bhakti mantra. Om is a little bit more impersonal. It's kind of like just Brahman in a more impersonal, abstract modality. And for the theistic traditions, are not going to be very satisfied with just Om, like the seed. They want that seed to manifest into their beloved forms of Ishvara and Ishvari. So the Om becomes Om Namo Narayanaya in the Krishnamacharya tradition. And it becomes Om Namo Shivaya in the Shaiva tradition. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Narayan. Okay, so bhaktas are going to want a fuller manifestation of their beloved Bhagavan, the form that has captured their hearts, my friends. Okay, if you want to fall in love with God in the Indian tradition, how do you do that? Well, you encounter the forms, the stories, the rupa guna, nama rupa guna lila, 4 things. The name of your beloved, perhaps that comes after, but the form, you get attracted to the form, and the qualities. All these beautiful forms have, and they're not made of matter. Don't think that they're material forms. So they are made of Satchidananda Brahman, Saguna Brahman. That guna's got nothing to do with the Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas guna. Guna means a quality. You can use it for Prakriti, you can use it for Brahman. It just means a quality. So you have the 3 gunas of Prakriti, but Brahman has gunas too, and those gunas have nothing to do with the gunas of Prakriti. They're Satchidananda, they're condensed consciousness, and the condensed consciousness takes these marvelous, wondrous forms that can appear in human space and time, as Eliade might say. And that's God. So you can fall in love with a form. How are you going to fall in love with God? If God's just some abstract category, you're not going to fall in love with an abstract category. How are you going to fall in love with an abstract category? Even in the mundane world, you want to find a partner, you're going to go and fall in love with some abstract partner, the notion of partnership. Are you going to fall in love with the category of partnership? Oh, I love that abstract notion. I don't think so. Good luck with that. Good luck starting a family with an abstract category of partnership. So say with Bhagavan, it's not some abstract category of God. In the Hindu tradition, these forms, Sagun Brahman manifest wonderful forms with qualities. They do cool things. That's called Leela. Krishna Leela, Rama Leela, Shiva Leela, Devi Leela, and then they manifest in the name. So you do dharana, we're talking about dharana, a little bit of background, dharana on the name. That's the most common form of Hindu meditation. Now, if you don't have a bhakta disposition and you want to do, you want to use this category of mythology, well, you're closing the door on something, but that's your choice, fine. Then you can fix your mind on anything you want. Patanjali says, yata abhimata, I fix it, he gives up. He gives up. He says, all right, Ishvara, japa. Then he says, all right, fix it on the breath, fix it on the tip of the nose, fix it on, and he has a little list. And at the end, he says, you can imagine, you sit there and then some disciple says, Guruji, Guruji, can I fix it on my big toe? Right? And he just says, Yatabi Mata, fix it on anything you want, but fix your mind. So that's Chitta Vritti Nirodha, Yata Nirodha on an object. That object's called a Lambana. So if mantra is by far, through the history of Indian literature, north, south, west, east, mantra, the manifestation of Ishvara in the name, is by far the most common form of dharana. Okay? I think you got a problem, you got some dvesha, raga, some, we don't like the notion of God, then fix it on your big toe. That works too, but it has to be, you can't move it, you can't move the mind. It's chitta vritti, nirodha. The vrittis have to be niroditaha, nirodha. They have to be utterly and completely stilled in Patanjali meditation. Don't confuse it with anything other forms of meditation. So dharana is deshabandha. You're fixing it on one place, right? And what I just said. And that place, the desha, typically is the mantra. Right now, and there's no difference between these three. The first 5 limbs of yoga, they're different sorts of things. Yamas are certain kinds of things that you do. And notice each one is progressively going more internal. Yamas is how you deal with others. You don't himsa, you don't inflict violence on them. You don't lie to them. You don't sexually, you're not a predator sexually on others. You don't, so you're celibate, meaning you don't sort of view others as sexual objects. And you don't covet thy neighbor's goods. Aparigraha, right? So those are how you deal with others. The niyamas are more, yourself. So you are shaucha, you're clean, shaucha and tapaha and svadhyaya and ishvara pranidhana. The others are not involved, so it's becoming more internal, more about you. You're clean. You're what is it? Shaucha. What's the next one? Shaucha.
Santosh.
Santosha, you content. Oh, look, we got 108 students here. That's an auspicious number, my friends. Everybody has a different reason why it's auspicious. In the Krishna tradition, there's 108 principal gopis. In the Shakta traditions, there's 108 primary nadis. Everyone's got a different answer as to what's with the 108. But we have 108 students here. So then the niyamas, and then you have asana as you're preparing your body. So you tatra stito, so you can sit, right? So you can sit, right? Asana actually means a seat. So tatra stito, stiram sukham, so you can sit stiram, nice and solid, so you don't fall asleep. Backbone extended, chest open, sukham, comfortably. And then pranayama, then you dirga, dirga sukshma, you're controlling your breath, bahir, different, there's a desha there, by the way. Same word we have in this verse, desha. Now you're really going inside the body itself. Asana is still in the body itself, but pranayama, now you're bridging the outside and the inside. And then pratyahara, again, you're even further internalizing, you're withdrawing consciousness. So each of these angas, if you want to think of them that way, are progressively internal, but then we get to the actual internal. And whereas the first 5 are different sorts of things, the last 3 are the same thing, but just progressively more and more focused versions of Chitta Vritti Nirodha. They're all Chitta Vritti Nirodha, actually. Dharana, there's still distractions, the mind's wavering, going, coming, going. Yata yata nischarati, as Krishna says, manas chanchalam asthiram, the mind's wandering off because it's chanchalam, it's not fixed. Then you bring it back, then it wanders off, then you bring it back, then you wanders off. We should all look at that verse. But I think it's really, it perfectly describes what dharana is. And it's the 6th chapter. I'll try to remember to bring it up next class. Eleonora, can you find this verse? Yatas yato nischarati. Put that in. Yato nischarati. Bhagavad Gita, I think it's 6. Manas chanchalam asthiram. Let's look at it if we can do it really quickly, because that's a perfect description of dharana, which we were looking at in the sutra. Somebody go on wiki, somebody go online. Yato yatas, it's either yato yatas yato nischarati. Anybody? Okay. Well, if somebody gets it, we'll look at it.
Chapter 6, 26th sloka.
Thank you very much. 6:26. Please bear with me, my friends. I think you will agree it will be worth it. So let me just bring that up. Let's see if I have it on my desktop. Winthrop Sargent. Sargent is just an excellent text. I recommend him to everybody. We're going to Finder. Going to document. Oh, there we is. Oops, sorry. Okay. So what did we just say? Gita, what? 6?
6, verse 26.
Thank you, sir. 6:26. We go in and we go down. 6:20. Oops, a bit too fast. Okay, my friends. So it's there. Now I have to stop share. And now, okay, we're looking at dharana. We're not taking a detour. We're looking at the dharana is to fix your mind on one place, right? And now what does that mean? Let's look at Gita. Wherever the unsteady mind moving to and fro wanders away, you should restrain it, control it in the self. So look at the Sanskrit. Yato nischarati, wherever it wanders, chara. What? Manas, the mind. What kind of a mind? Chanchalam, it's going mind. Chal. Chalo, you've been to India. What does chalo mean? Let's go. Chal. It's a reduplicative. Reduplicative means intensive. It's a chanchalam. It's really chal. It's a chal mind. It's a going mind. That's just with Sanskrit. You do that. You double the root, and it makes it intense. Okay, so wherever it goes, this mind, this chanchalam mind, and it's astiram. What does asana do? It makes you stiram, sukham. This is astiram. The mind is fickle, not fixed. Wherever it goes, tatastato, from that place, niyam yetad, you bring it back, control it. Atmanyeva vashamnaya, bring it back under the control of the self. This is dharana, my friends. Nothing magical, nothing mystical, right? So this is dharana, right? Deshabandha, fixing of the mind. Well, you're fixing it, but you know, for many years, and still for many of us, we're really at this place here. We fix it, it wanders off, we bring it back, it wanders off, bring it back, wanders off, and that's dharana. It's hard work. It's hard work. If you want to have a meditation practice, don't think it's going to be all ooey or mystical, magical. It's not. It's hard work. You've got to get up in the morning, fix your mind. Now, half the time you feel like doing it. You do it anyway. Remember Abhyasa, Patanjali. Tatra stito yatna. It's an effort to keep the mind fixed. And you have to do it dirgha kala, for a long time, nirantarya, no interruptions, and do it satkara sevita with appreciation and respect. Now, when that dharana is less going, chanchalam, when it's not chanchalam anymore, it's beginning to become stiram, not astiram, unfixed, but stiram. When it's starting to become fixed, the tatra, from there, tatra, the next verse 2, pratyaya eka tanata, when the content of the mind is tanata, is drawn out, that's dhyanam. What's the difference? With dharana, okay, here's what the commentators say. Lovely analogy. Compare a dripping tap. Each drop is identical, but there's a gap between them. So drop, gap, drop, gap, drop, gap. So when you're doing it, let's say I'm doing my mantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. My mind is flowing nicely. Krishna, Hare Rama, Rama Rama. And then I start thinking of email. That's the gap, right? So off I go, email, but right. And then my higher self, my buddhi, realizes, hey, brings it back, and then back it's nice flow, and then some other samskara, right? When we're going to have a breath. So this is dharana, like a dripping tap. So when I'm focused on the mantra, It's like the drop of water. When I'm thinking of my email, thinking of breakfast, that's like the gap, and then the drop, and then the gap, and then the drop, and then the gap. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Email, 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 email. All right, off it goes. Hare Krishna, back I come. Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. What's for breakfast? What's for breakfast? What's for breakfast? That's dharana. And if we're honest, that's where we're at. Well, that's where I'm at after 45 years. So don't expect you're going to be blissing out in Svarupa Vastanam anytime soon. All right. So then, but when tatra from there, so it's in the same place. Tatra means there. So unlike the other 5 angas, that they're all very different. They're not all tatra. They're not all doing the same thing. I mean, the end goal is the same, but yamas, brahmachari is different from ahimsa. But tatra, in this practice, in this very thing, when that dharana, when it's dhanata, it's stretched out. Your mantra now is no longer, no gaps in it anymore, no email interruptions anymore, no what's for breakfast and interruptions anymore. Pratyaya eka, only one pratyaya. What's that one pratyaya? The thing you're focusing your mind on. That's why it's sabija. Bija is a samskara. That's why the first 6 stages are sabija. I'm fixing my mind on my mantra. That mantra's leaving a bija, like any sense impression does. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. That sound is coming out of my mouth, going in my ear, and leaving a bija, where bija is another word for samskara, my friends. So that creates a pratyaya. Pratyaya is the content of a samskara. So when that content is just my mantra now, no more interruptions. Now I can say I've actually attained the state of dhyana. And don't diss it. That's very high. As a matter of fact, this type of yoga, even though Patanjali has it as the 7th limb, a lot of the other texts, like the Puranas, they will call this type of practice dhyana yoga, dhyana. They actually use that term to describe this kind of sedentary, inactive, chittavritti nirodha type of yoga. It's called dhyana in the larger culture. So dhyana, okay, right. So there we have it. Okay, so then we gave the example of the I didn't. The commentators do. Dhyana is like the So dharana is like the dripping tap. Space, drop, space. Dhyana is like pouring olive oil, my friends. If you pour, it's so thick and unctuous. When you pour olive oil, it doesn't drip. It flows in this thick, unctuous, unbroken modality. That's dhyana. So you see how the lovely metaphor, isn't it? A dripping tap compared to the flow of oil. So when it's just flowing like thick, unctuous oil, I don't know. Yeah, I suppose they might say ghee. Then we've reached the stage of dhyana. So when it's stretched out, dhanata. Now we're getting somewhere. Now our meditation is actually, we can even talk about being yogis at this point. Now, what's samadhi? Now, he only has one verse for samadhi. You could say, why does he only have one verse? It's the goal. Well, how about because he spent the whole of the first chapter talking about samadhi? He doesn't need to go all over that now. Now he just has to connect that whole first chapter onto the 8 limbs of yoga. He's already discussed the 7 stages of samadhi. Sabitarka, nirbitarka, sabichara, nirbichara, ananda, asmita, and then nirbija, which is Swarupa Vastanam, a verse 2, a verse 3 rather. Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha Hatada. What's the ultimate grand finale goal? Drashtuhu Svarupe Vastanam. That is what nirbija is. There are no bijas. Why are there no bijas? Because consciousness is not flowing through the mind onto its object, onto its mantra, onto its big toe, onto whatever it is it's fixing on. So there's no bija. So what's consciousness doing? Svarupa Vastanam. It's absorbed in its own nature, my friends, its own pure nature. And this is a very high level. And beware, Patanjali talks about we all have sattvic moments and we feel like we think, oh, I've attained samadhi. No, we haven't. We've attained a bit of sattva. Or people say, oh, I've had a samadhi experience. Probably not, my friends. It's probably sattva, which is a very high state. I'm not dissing it, but once you've had a samadhi, a real near bija, you no more kleshas. You can't have someone that's exhibiting ego and ignorance and desire and then claiming to have a samadhi experience. No, oxymoron. A samadhi experience, you've gone beyond the kleshas. When you come back down, your behavior, there is no more asmita, avidya, uraga, and dvesha in your behavior. So don't think you've had a little, samadhi experience just because, we've contacted sattva. Congratulate yourself, but it's sattva. The real, the near bija will be demonstrated, will have complete indifference to everything in the world. Complete vairagya. Nothing in the world will interest us anymore. So therefore, no more raga dveshas, no more ahankara, no more asmita, no more avidya. We will be jivan muktas. If you have a near bija, if you actually say, I've had a samadhi experience, then that's what you're claiming. Then don't be having ragas and dveshas, because that's a no right there. But may have had a nice sattvic experience, nothing wrong, well done, all good and proper. But there's too many people running around claiming this, that, and the other, my friends. Come on, it's not the 60s anymore. We should be informed consumers. We're not dopes like we were in the 60s. We didn't know a spiritual experience from, we were easily taken in by anybody with a beard and a little shakti. Charisma's got nothing to do with yogic truths. So come on, we're not, it's been 75 years now since, the big kind of transplantation in the 60s. I know it occurred before that. So, okay, so a real sort of Svarupa experience, you have two options after that. There's nothing in the world that interests you. So either you just sit in your room and just go in and out, in and out, in and out of that experience until your karma is burnt up and you die. Or you go out in the world and help others, like the Bodhisattva and of Buddhism and the Jivan Muktas of Hinduism. That's what you would do. What else would you do? There is nothing else you would do if you'd actually had a Svarupa Vastanam experience. You'd either go out in the world and teach it to others, because it's the only way of being free from suffering. Yoga is that which takes you beyond suffering. Bhagavad Gita. That's one of the three definitions of yoga in the Gita and the Nyaya, that which takes you beyond suffering. So then you teach it to others. Or, as some yogis do, and this is a big difference between Mahayana. The Mahayana criticized the Theravada traditions because the Theravada traditions, according to Mahayana anyway, I'm sure Theravada wouldn't accept it, but Mahayana says, you guys are just doing your own meditation, whereas we Mahayanas, we have this bodhisattva principle where we don't even go into, we withhold ourselves. We don't go into nirvana so we can help others. And the equivalent of that in yoga, in Sankhya, is called the Jivan Mukta. Is Mukta liberated, but Jivan still embodied. So Samadhi then is, how does he define it? Why does he only have one verse? Because he had a whole chapter. And this, by the way, the definition he gives here looks a bit like savitarka, nirvitarka. What is it? It is tad eva artha matra nirbhasham svarupa sunyam. It's when that same dhyana, right? Remember, dharana, dhyana, samadhi, they're the same thing, but each one is progressively deeper. When the object shines forth in it's devoid of its own reflective nature. Do you remember savitarka, when you're focusing on the object, but you're not aware of the name of the object, you're not aware of what it is. Just the object in its own nature. It's not cluttered by language, not cluttered by cognitive structures. So if you're meditating on, I don't know, your prana, and when you get to nirvitarka, the second state of samadhi, you're not aware of, this is my prana, and prana is what circulates in the body, and prana is no, none of that, because that's all conceptual stuff. And you're not even aware of the name prana. You're just aware of that thing in its own right. Svarupa. We've had the word Svarupa the Atman can be Svarupa in its own right, well, so can an object be in Svarupa, in its own essence. An object has Svarupa. We come along and give it names and throw concepts at it. We say a tree is that which, provides, I don't know, shade and wood. So we throw our human conceptual categories at it, and we give it a name, tree, vriksha in Sanskrit. But when that object is uncluttered with conceptual structures and linguistic assignments, then that is the definition he's chosen here, which we can connect to, for whatever reason he's chosen nirvitarka for his definition here, okay? But he's already discussed samadhi in the first pada. Now, trayam ekatra, the three of these together is called samyamaha. He's going to use this term now, samyamaha, and it refers to all three. And I always to puzzle, what does it mean, the three of them together? You can't do the three of them together. When you're doing samadhi, you've already left behind dhyana and dharana. So how can you do the three together? And the only way I make sense of that is when you sit down, you don't just snap into samadhi. You've got to go, spend a few minutes or whatever period of time in dharana, and then you deepen into dhyana, and then you enter samadhi. If you're a very accomplished practitioner, I'm unfortunately still stuck in a place of dharana, but I'm grateful for it and no complaints because I'm on the path. So that's a blessing. So, but you can't do all three of them together because when you're in samadhi, you're not in dharana and dhyana. So what does he mean when he says ekatra, the three of them together, sanyamaha? It can only mean that you do the three of them together sequentially. So when you start to meditate, you have to go through dharana and sort of warm up, get the mind, mind's not going to just fall into a place of samadhi unless you're very, 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 very accomplished. It might in some rare cases. I'm sure we've all heard stories. But for the most part, you've got to go through dharana, then dhyana, and then you enter samadhi. So that's the only way it makes sense of how can these three things be performed simultaneously. Trayam ekatra, the three of them, ekata. There you are, Sanskritists. Last chapter. Yatra, tatra, kutra, ekatra, sarvatra. This is the tra ending, one at a time. Right, now, tat jayat and prajnalokaha. And when that is mastered, from the jaya, from the mastery of sanyama, you get these words like prajna, alokaha, and really, there's no real difference between these words, viveka, prajna, this ritambhara. Folks spend a lot of time trying to sort of flesh out nuances. But the commentators seem to take them all as synonyms, prajna, viveka, and these kinds of words. I wouldn't sort of invest too much intellectual energy trying to separate meaning. The commentators don't. I'm not saying there's not people that maybe come up with some definitions, and that's fine. And if that works for you, but the commentators take them more or less synonymously. The rain cloud and the dharma mega and prajna and viveka. These are all the ultimate expressions of the intelligence. And if people want to come up with differences between them, that's fine, but the commentators don't. And I'm interested in the commentators, and and I'm trying to transmit that. Okay, so this prajna is and the ultimate prajna. What is the ultimate prajna? What is the ultimate viveka? Is to distinguish between prakriti and purusha, and that means between buddhi and purusha. It's all very well saying I'm not the tree out in my garden. We're not talking about that kind of distinguishing Purusha from Prakriti. Well, obviously, I'm not the tree is Prakriti and I'm not the tree. Anyone can do that. But to distinguish the highest aspect of intelligence from the real self, well, that's another proposition. That I'm not my thinking mind at all. I'm not even my meditating mind. I'm not even my mind when it's nirodhitaha, in a state of nirodha. So that's the ultimate act of viveka. The ultimate act of viveka, the last thing you're even aware of, if you want to talk about the highest possible state of mind, and you want to use a term prajna or viveka or dharma mega. What's the highest possible? What's the grand finale thing? The highest accomplishment of the mind. The last thing, before entering into Nirbija Samadhi, the last thing the yogi is aware of is the Nirodha Samskara. The samskara which is nirodhering all the other samskaras. Nirodha means to restrain. So call it what you want, but that's the ultimate highest possible thing the mind can do, is nirodha all other samskaras, and it's called the Nirodha Samskara. In one place and elsewhere it's called Nirodha Samskara, which is also Virama, the Virama, the one which stops. Same thing. Virama, Nirodha, same thing. I think we get a little too carried away trying to look for differences when they're just synonyms. Anyway, commentators take it that way. So then you get this prajna loka, this insight. And what is ultimate insight, my friend? It's not some mystical power. It's not some ooey, cool way of looking at reality. It's not some, it is to understand the utter and complete distinction. This is hardcore dualism. Complete and utter distinction between anything prakritic, including the highest thing the buddhi, the mind, can do, and consciousness itself. That's the ultimate state of mind. If you want to talk about the highest insight, or use whatever language you want, that's what the highest is. Namaskar, Teresa. Kya hal chal hai? How are you, Teresa? Okay, so last time I saw Teresa was in Vrindavan, picking ticks out of cows. So that's that. Then you know you're a bhakta. When you pick ticks off the bulls, then that's bhakti, not a far cry from Patanjali. Right now, and this prajna loka has viniyoga, 7. There are different stages of samadhi. And Patanjali gave us 6 of them, sabijas, in the first chapter. We don't have. You can go and refresh yourself, and they each have different bhumi. Bhumi is ground. So I don't want to go over them. They're technical, right? Sabitarka, nirbitaka. Okay, but go back and check the first because we got a lot to cover, my friends. Right now. So but quickly, right? Sabitarka. Okay. Sabitarka is, they're all states of fixed mind, nirodha. You've gone through dharana dhyana. Okay, sabitarka, you fix your mind on the object, but you're still kind of subtly aware of the name of the object and the function of the object. You're not vrittying, because when you get to samadhi, no vrittis. But there's still some, the only way you can make sense of it is some kind of subconscious awareness of what the thing is. And then nirvitarka, you lose them. You're not aware of the name. You're not aware of what it is, its function in the world. You're just that object, and that's what he used to define samadhi in verse 3. Then savichara is you go, but the object, even in nirvitarka, you don't know what the object is. The name, you're not aware of its name. You're not aware of its function, but you're still aware of space and time. There's still a sense of nowness and here-ness. And so the second state is savichara. You lose that sense of here-ness, time and space. Here-ness is space, and nowness is time. And that's nirvichara, and then that's savichara. Nirvichara it's cosmic. There's no here and now. The object, because the object, you're still fixing your mind on the object, but the object is not even bound by space and time, because whatever that object is, its subtle nature is the same as the subtle nature of the entire cosmos. Think of the Sankhya chart. From buddhi comes ahankara, and then come the tanmatras, and then the mahabhutas, right? You've all looked at your charts in the back of your yoga books, where you have this little family tree thing, and you have prakriti, and then intelligence, and then you have ego, and then, all right? So the substructure, whatever your object is the same as the substructure of your entire universe. So in that deep, deep state, you're not even aware, you become cosmic. And then once you become cosmic, and it sounds a bit too 60s, we shouldn't use that term because then, because it's not the 60s anymore. So what should we say? That the, well, just like physics, you whatever you're fixing your mind on, ultimately it's made of subatomic particles and forces, gravity, electromagnetic, strong nuclear, weak nuclear, subatomic, entities, whether they're muons or gluons or strings, what does it matter? And those subatomic entities and forces underpin everything. So what's the difference? Science would make the same claim. You're focusing your mind on your mantra. Well, those the atoms bouncing about in the air are ultimately the cosmic, if we want to use that 60s term. They underpin all reality. So I don't think this is such a grandiose claim, because physics would make the same claim. So then we have Ananda. The Ananda Samadhi is, okay, we're just having a quick review of chapter 1. And Ananda Samadhi is when you enter into the gunas and you contact, sattva. And one of the qualities of sattva, when it's free of rajas and tamas, is sukham. It's not the bliss of the Atman. Don't get it confused with the bliss of the Atman. That's a completely different ontological thing. Don't get the sukha of sattva confused with when the Vedantins talk about Satchidananda of the Atman. Yoga doesn't use that language, by the way, Satchidananda. That's Vedanta language. It's coming from the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad and the Taittiriya Upanishad. That's Satchidananda. Actually, it's not coming from the Upanishads at all. That phrase Satchidananda is not to be found in the Upanishads. But somebody told me it's found in the Tejo Upanishad, but it's not one of the great 8 Upanishads that Shankara wrote a commentary on. I have to look into this Tejo Upanishad, because this person told me it was 3rd century BCE. I have to check that out. It sounds odd to me that there could be a Tejo Upanishad at the 3rd century BC. It sounds like a late Upanishad, but I'm going to investigate, and if anyone's interested, I'll get back to you. But Satchidananda is not found. So, but anyway, the Vedantins talk. They use the term Ananda. They use the term Ananda, but they use the term Satyam Jnanam Ananta in the Taittiriya. That's the definition of Brahman. What is Brahman? Satyam Jnanam Anantam. And then at some point, then Satchidananda. Now everybody uses the term Satchidananda, but that's okay. That was a detour, but no, it's not a detour, because we're talking about Ananda Samadhi. So that Ananda is inherent in Sattva Guna. So when the mind is very, very sattvic, you experience total detachment, total peace, and total bliss. And it's easily confused with samadhi. That's why people say, oh, I have had a samadhi experience. What are they talking about? They had a sattva experience, my friends. Nothing wrong with that. I'm not putting it down. I'm just, intellectuals categorize things. That's what Patanjali's doing. That's what sutra traditions are. They categorize, they schematize, they organize information. So, so the Ananda Samadhi is, you're still absorbed in the mind, because it's Sabija. It's not Svarupa Vastanam. It's not consciousness conscious of consciousness in its Svarupa and its own. So therefore it's a mind. But what state is the mind? Pure Sattva. And what are the qualities of pure Sattva? Read the Gita. Happiness, detachment. In fact, the Gita says, even the Gita says, be careful. It's a bandhana. You get bound. It will bind you. It's a high state. And if the whole world was sattvic, it would be a wonderful place. But it's still a guna. It's still prakriti. It's still externalized mind. It's not the goal. So that's Ananda Samadhi. And Asmita now is when that sattva becomes, and this is way beyond conceptualization, way beyond words. And when something is beyond conceptualization and beyond words, either you don't say anything about it or you use analogies and metaphors. So the commentators say the mind becomes like a mirror and reflects consciousness back to itself. So consciousness now has an experience of itself, but reflected. It's still mediated by the mind. That's why it's still sabija, but it's the highest state of sabija. It's the one before nirbija. So it's kind of like looking at yourself in the mirror. It's you. But it's not you absorbed in you. It's you reflected in an external medium. So asmita samadhi is still an experience of the mind. Consciousness is absorbed in the mind and having an experience of that mind in that state. And asmi means I am. Asmi. Have you noticed how it's a klesha? Why is it a klesha? Avidya, asmita, raga, dvesha, abhinivesha, asmita. And how come it's a samadhi then? How come it's a klishta thing and an aklishta thing? Well, what does asmi mean? I am. Asmita means the state of I amness. The avidya asmita is I am the body mind. That's a klesha. The asmi, who am I? Body mind. That's avidya klesha. That's avidya asmita. But in samadhi, consciousness is reflected in the mirror of the mind. This is who I am pure consciousness. The Vedanta says, Brahmasmi, Brahmasmi, Asmi, who am I? Brahmasmi. That is pure Asmi, real Asmi, Vidya Asmi, Viveka Asmi, Prajna Asmi. Plug in any of the synonyms you want. Who am I? Brahmasmi, the Upanishads say. Tattvamasi, you are too. Tattvamasi, most famous line in the Upanishads. Shvetaketu, Sa Atma, Tattvamasi, you're that very Atman too. Okay, so that Asmi is the real Asmi, the Vidya Asmi, and therefore the Asmita Samadhi. Whereas the Asmita Klesha, that's the wrong Asmi. Why is it wrong? Well, body mind, I'm body mind. Who are you? Oh, I'm a man, I'm a woman, I'm black, I'm white, I'm a teacher, I'm a student, I'm a Republican, I'm a Democrat. That's all, that's the Avidya Asmi. When you ask the question, who are you? Then you either answer from a Klishta place or an Aklishta place. The Klishta place is avidya, body, mind, gender, race, profession. And the aklishta asmi is there's only one aklishta asmi, and that's the Atman, pure consciousness. So when that highest sabija state, the mind, if the mind realizes it, Atman's not realizing anything. It can't realize anything. Realization takes place in the mind external to it. But consciousness, the mind has a eureka moment as it reflects. The mind is actually catching a glimpse of Atman. If you want to put it that way, it's probably a better way of putting it. Oh, that's who I am. Asmita Samadhi. And then finally, it's just a state of consciousness, aware of consciousness. And you could say, who wants that? There's no mental functioning. There's no, okay, Vedanta comes along and says, well, it's Ananda. It's bliss. What we do know is anyone coming out of that state has whatever that state consists of, because it's pure consciousness, so you can't describe it, because descriptions are experiences embedded in the mind, samskaras, whatever it is. When one comes out of Nirbija Samadhi, they have no interest in the world of gunas anymore. Vairagya, remember Patanjali, Tatparam Guna Vaitrishnam. The two verses in Patanjali on Vairagya. The second one, higher than the lower one is just Vairagya of sense objects. The higher one is Guna Vaitrishnam. Nothing of the gunas means anything made of matter, anything, subtle matter. Vaitrishna, no interest. Because whatever that experience is, you can't describe it. But we know one thing, whatever it is, there's nothing in the gunas that's comparable to it. So the yogis, again, go back to what I said before. They either want to return to that state and just until their karma burns out, and then they leave the mortal coil, as someone, Vivekananda or somebody said. Or no, it was a English poet said that, the mortal coil. It was one of the English mystical poets anyway. So either you just keep going, try to just remain in that state, or you go out in the world and as a great being, and you teach others, not just philanthropy to the body mind, that's fine, but the real great beings are not just engaging in philanthropy, because philanthropy is temporary. They're trying to give jnana, atma jnana, knowledge of the self, or if they're bhaktas, knowledge of Bhagavan. Okay, my friends, back to the Patanjali. So the Trayam, these, okay, now why are these three in a separate chapter? Well, here's Patanjali's explanation. These Trayam, the three, there are Antara Angas, right? The Ashta Angas, the 8 Angas, these are Antara, internal Angas, Purvebhyaha, compared to the other 5, the previous ones. So that would be, he doesn't come out and say, why has he put them in a different chapter? But that would be that's his Shakespeare. Thank you, Nancy. Did he say that? Mortal coil? Okay. He wasn't much of a mystic, was he, Shakespeare? Maybe he was. So then why are Hamlet? Why are these three in a separate chapter? Well, because they're necessary for the main theme of the chapter is mystic powers, but they're also internal. Purvebhyaha compared to the previous ones, which would be the 5. Okay, so on we go, my friends. Now, what is Nirodha? We know that yoga is Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Vyutana Nirodha Vyutana Nirodha Samskarayor Abhibhava Pradurbhavo Nirodha Kshana Chitanvayo Nirodha Parinama. Okay, now that when the mind parinama transforms into a state of Nirodha, what does it mean when the mind is in a state of Nirodha? There is the abhibhava vyutana, there is an absence of outward going vrittis or samskaras, and there is a pradhurbhava, and there is a manifestation of nirodha samskaras. Okay, so when we say, okay, that's how he defines it. When we say, second verse, okay, yoga chitta vritti nirodha. Well, what does that mean? Well, Patanjali says, well, nirodha is when the outward going samskaras, remember vrittis come from samskaras, so he defines yoga as chitta vritti nirodha. You could just as well define it as chitta samskara nirodha, because vrittis come from samskaras. Where does a vritti come from? A thought comes from a memory. It doesn't just magically come from nowhere. When you think, when you have a thought, it's coming from a samskara in the chitta. So the chitta is the seed and the vritti is the sort of activation, the content of that seed. So what is nirodha is when there is a absence of outward going vrittis and a manifestation of nirodha samskara. I'm sorry, there is an absence of outward going samskaras. He's going to call it samskaras. The samskaras which normally generate vrittis, which distract consciousness when our mind is thinking. Samskaras are manifesting vrittis. Thought is of vrittis. Vrittis come from samskaras. So those samskaras that produce active thought, there's an absence of those. And what replaces them then? The nirodha samskaras. What's a nirodha samskara? It's not letting anything in the mind activate. Okay? Are we doing okay up there in the celestial realms? Am I going too fast? Oh, are we okay? All right, we keep going, Sylvia. Yeah. So I'm, you get in the zone, and you like a surfer, you just keep going. So this, it's a little bit technical. Well, the yoga sutras are meant to be technical. Sutras are expositions of technical subject matter. That's what a sutra is. It's not epic. It's not poetry. It's not history. It's not narrative. It's not Puran. It's not Itihas. It is the encapsulation of technical information, and minimalistically, in the minimal amount of words. It's kind of like a dictionary. The dictionary gives you the definition and minimalistically. That's what a sutra is. Okay, so that's when the mind transforms in the state of nirodha, right? At the moment, kshana chitanvayo, at that moment, kshana means a moment, chitta anvayo, at the moment when the mind, the transformation of the mind at the moment that it enters the state of nirodha, what does it mean? There is an absence of outward going samskaras or samskaras that trigger thought, that pull consciousness outward, and there is in its place, in the place of the appearance, in the absence of the outward going samskaras, they're replaced by the manifestation of nirodha samskara. Nirodha means to restrain. Right. Tasya prashanta vahitas. It's because of samskaras that the mind flows. When your mind is flowing, let's say you're in the state of dhyana, you're chanting your mantra, and you're not thinking about email or breakfast. I'm just using those, just as stand-ins for any thought content. Why? How does that happen? That prashanta, that flow, nirodha samskaras are operating. And keeping everything else checked, keeping everything else suppressed, actually. So it's suppression. We've had this before, my friends. Yoga is ultimate suppression. Go tell your shrink, look him right in the face and say, he said, what do? I suppress my mind. Deal with it. I do yoga. What's that? I suppress my mind. That's what it is. It's not, your nirodha samskara is an act of force. Patanjali describes it yatna. What is abhyasa? Yatna. Effort. What's effort? Force. So take it or leave it. But it is an act of will, an act of force. As any good thing is. As any achievement in any sphere of life. If you want to attain something, you have to be determined. What is that determination? It's a kind of force. You're actually controlling other things that interfere with it. You're suppressing other things. We just don't like that word suppression. Well, fine. Find another word that your shrink might sign off on. Something like suppression. You could say, there is nothing as good as suppression, because that's what it is. All this talk of peacing, pacifying the mind. No, that's not yoga. Pacifying, not about having a peaceful mind, not about having a calm mind. No, it's about having no thoughts at all. And the only way you can have no thoughts at all is with intense acts of nirodha determination. Think about it. Think it through, my friends. Who believes in reincarnation? Hands up if you believe in reincarnation or you're open to it. What does that mean? That means you've had how many lives? Well, how about infinite lives? They're not going to say you had 100 or 1,000, because then you have to explain, well, what was your first life then? Where did that come from? Right? You got a problem right there. They're not going to say you fell out of paradise. That doesn't work for the Hindu way of thinking. If paradise is perfect, how can you fall out of it? You can't fall out of a perfect place. You can't have an imperfect thought in a perfect place in a Hindu way of thinking. So therefore, if you didn't have a first life, well, what's the only other alternative? Infinite lives. Now, what have you been doing in that infinite lives? How about chittavrittying? Dog life, animal life, all kinds of human lives. Every single life, our minds have been vrittying. And we've had multiple human lives. And now finally we get to a human life and we decide we're going to do yoga. Why we decide that? Because we suffered enough. Nothing glamorous. Nothing, no big insight. No, suffering. That's why it's the first truth of Buddhism. So dukkham, right. So nothing very glorious, very selfish as a matter of fact. So we suffer. So we decide, let me give this yoga a go. We give this yoga a go. And in that life, Patanjali tells us to nirodha. That mind, which has been vrittying for infinite births, you think all of a sudden in this life you're going to be nirodha in 5 minutes? I don't think so. Its nature is to vritti. It's done that. It's done nothing else since beginningless time. So don't beat yourself up if you sit down to meditate and your mind's all over the place, and don't give up. Don't say, I can't do this. No, say, of course my mind's vrittying. What else has it been doing for time immemorial? So be a bit humble and be a bit grateful that the great beings have given us these practices, and don't expect to have success. I used to think, 45 years I've been in the business now. I used to think I'd be enlightened, you know, at 30. And I'm 67 and I'm still like, I feel like I'm going backwards sometimes. So, you know, you keep going, what does Krishna, what does Arjuna say in the Gita, at the end of chapter 6? He says, Krishna, I can't fix the mind. It's, he says, astiram, he says, chanchalam, the same word. Chanchalam is a going mind. And how am I going to, he says, it's like controlling the air. You can't control the air. Krishna says, Arjuna, you know, really what Arjuna is saying is, I can't, you know, he's not rejecting it. He's just saying, I can't do it. So really what he's saying is, why bother trying? If I know I can't chitta vritti nirodha, then it's a very short step from saying, this is really hard to do, and a very small step to saying, I can't do it. And then another very small step, why should I bother trying then? That's the subtext of the question. End of chapter 6, you read it. So Krishna says, it's true, Arjuna, very hard, but it can be done with perseverance. And he uses the same two words, Vairag, Abhyasena, Vairagyena. And then he says, slowly over aneka janma. Aneka, not one. Aneka, not one. You're not going to do it in this life. Krishna says it. So does that mean you don't do anything at all? No. You do what you can in this life. Why do you do what you can in this life? Because next life, he says you pick up. Vashoapi. Your next life, Vashoapi. Without even thinking about it, you'll be automatically attracted to meditation because you've already put this strong layering in a previous life, and you'll continue from there. So don't think because you can't do it, therefore you're not going to do anything, my friends. Do what you can in this life. And according anyway to chapter 6, we pick off. Don't you notice how some people seem to start off with a head start? It's not because they're special beings floating about on some cloud. No, they did some hard work in the previous life. That's also, we do what work we can in this life, and we pick it up in the next life. Especially in bhakti, you don't even get to control bhakti right now. Right. So the undisturbed, the prashanta, you know what shanti means? Prashanta, the peaceful flow of the mind is because of samskaras, not because of magic. The mind is peaceful because samskaras of the mind are controlling it, suppressing the other samskaras. Go ahead, say it. Suppress it. Suppression. It is suppression. But this is aklishta suppression. Aklishta, it's good. Let the shrink say what they want to say. This is aklishta suppression. Benevolent. It's going to take you to a higher being. So it is by, so that's it. Okay, so it's samskaras. Look at the Sanskrit. Samskarat, Sanskritists. Because of, remember the ablative case, because of samskaras, there is the prashanta, the peaceful vahita, flow, tasya of the mind in jhana. Samskaras are doing the work. It's not some wishy-washy mystical meditational state. It's hard work. Samskaras are working. Especially, for many lifetimes. And then eventually the mind transforms, it becomes sattvic, there's less work, its very nature has changed. That's all well and good. Maybe some of you already reached there. Well, my namaha to you. My namaha to you. And if you're already there, that's because you did work in a past life. There's no magic. There's no head, no special nothing, no special souls, no special, it's hard work in the Jnana tradition. You want, bhakti is a little bit different. Even bhakti. Now, parinama samadhi, the transformation of the mind into samadhi. What does it mean when you're samadhi? Sarv artha ekagratayo kshaya udaya chitasya. What is samadhi of the mind? It is the all-pointedness of the mind becomes eliminated, and one-pointedness arises. He's just repeating the same thing. What is samadhi? The nature of the mind is it can be all pointed. It can think of anything randomly, go here, there, just thinking about a million different things. Samadona vidiyate, Krishna says in the Gita about those whose desires are unrestricted, unrestrained. Your mind can go all over the place and think of anything. So what is the transformation of the mind? The samadhi parinama is when the all-pointedness, meaning the potential to think of anything, ceases and one-pointedness arises. Ekagrata. That's samadhi. The mind has both potentials. It can be, for most of us, it's all over the place. But when we, once we, when we do some practice and we're in a good day, then ekagrata, then it's one-pointed, and that's all it is. Okay, you see the Sanskrit? So we have sarvartha and ekagratayo, ekagrata. Ekagrata is one, is grasping one thing. Graha is to grasp. Eka is grasping one thing only, your mantra. Whereas normally it's sarva artha, its objects are sarva, all objects. So there's a kshaya, see the kshaya? There's the elimination of sarvartha. Sanskrit bounces around. It doesn't follow English syntax, my friends. There's the elimination of all of sarva artha. Of artha is an object. It can mean different things. Here it means an object. So what is look at the end, samadhi, the parinama, the transformation of the mind into samadhi, chittasya, asya is genitive, of the mind. The transformation of the mind in samadhi, in other words, when it's in a state of samadhi, it's been transformed. But in what way has it been transformed? Well, in this way. There is the sarv artha kshaya. So take the first two words here. You have to know a way to break them up. The all objects, now jump, kshaya, elimination of all objects. And the udaya, the second part here, the udaya, the arising of ekagrata, of the grasping of one thing only. So you're not thinking of breakfast, you're not thinking of email. Let's keep our little examples going for consistency. The mind, that would be sarvartha, but now you're just thinking of your mantra. Okay. Now we're getting ready. We're going to be getting near the cities in a minute. Now we've got another parinama. Notice the end of the word here. The sutra. There's a parinama there. That means that the mind is transforming in some sort of a way. There was a samadhi parinama in verse 11. So that's the parinama again, right? The mind is, you're changing the mind, right? And we had another, here's another nirodha parinama. When the mind parinama, it means it transforms into nirodha. Okay, so keep your eye on this word parinama, parinama, parinama. Right, that's what yoga is. We want to transform the mind, or ultimately go beyond it. But before we go beyond it, we've got to transform it. We've got to parinama. So, what is the, so now what verse are we on? Tata punaha shanta udita tulya pratyayo chittasya ekagrata parinama. So he just said in the previous verse that samadhi parinama is when there is a cessation of all pointedness, sarva artha, any object could randomly manifest, that's sarva artha, and the arisal in the mind, the arising in the mind. Is there such a word as arisal? I'm going mad. The not arousal. You don't want to be aroused, but the manifestation in the mind of one-pointedness. Now, what is this one-pointedness? See it here in verse 11, in the middle there. Eka agrata. You see it? Don't worry about all the stuff around it. See that eka agrata? Now here it is at the end here. Now he's going to define this ekagrata. What does it mean that the mind, parinama, transforms into ekagrata, into grasping one thing only, chittasya, asya, the genitive. What does that mean? That the mind is one-pointed? It means that the puna shanta udita tulya pratyaya, the content of the mind that has just passed is the same as the content of the mind at present. That's what it means to be grasping one thing. I will give you an example. So if I'm chanting my mantra, Hare Krishna, right now the content of my mind is Hare Krishna, the sound, Hare Krishna. I'm not thinking, it's not distracted, no email, no breakfast. Hare Krishna, right? Now that Hare Krishna's passed and the next Hare Krishna comes, the content of the next Hare Krishna is the same as the content of the previous Hare Krishna, and the next one is the same, and the next one is the same, and the next one is the same. That is the transformation of the mind into one-pointedness. One-pointedness means there's one point. What does one point mean? The past content is the same as the present content, and it will be the same as the future content. Straightforward, simple. A little bit clunky in Sanskrit, but that's what it is. Right, Tess? Yep. Tess knows all about this. She sits there for an hour with one-pointedness. Right? Okay, there we go.
I wish.
Yeah. Now. Right. Now are we ready? Are we ready now for mystic powers? All of this is preamble. We're now entering into mystic powers, and it gets a little technical. And it's interesting, the commentators don't say a lot in their commentaries on mystic powers. They're not really, either they're not interested in it, or they haven't experienced it. You know, I don't want to think of them as intellectuals, because at least one of them, Vijnana Bhikshu, he claims that he's perceived the Atman. He just mentions it. He's not like bragging. I mean, he's written volumes and volumes and volumes and volumes. He's one of the great intellectual colossi of ancient India. We have certain amazing intellectuals that compose masses of stuff, Vyas, and we have, you know, Shankara, Ramanuja, we have Jiva Goswami in the Gaudiya tradition, and we have this Vijnana Bhikshu. But they're also practicing yogis. Don't think being an intellectual means you're stuck in your head and you don't have it. Who said that? Said that? Just because you have a certain kind of intellect, that doesn't mean you're not engaging in amazing yoga practice. So Vijnana Bhikshu, he only mentions it once. He's written masses. And he just says, you know, I can't remember how he said it. And then, you know what? I tried to find it. I couldn't even find it again. And I spoke to another scholar who translates Vijnana Bhikshu. He wrote a book on Vijnana Bhikshu. I said, did you see that where is it that Vijnana Bhikshu just kind of casually mentions that he'd had an experience of the pure consciousness? He said, yes, I've read it. He said, he read it, completely independent. And I said, where is it? He said, I don't know. He said the same thing. He said, I read it and then I looked for it and I couldn't find it. So yogis don't brag. Anybody start saying bragging about their experiences, my friends, as we say in Britland, don't touch them with a 10-foot barge pole. There's no business bragging about any experiences that you have. You know, real yogis never talk about their experiences. You have to ask them, and even then, you have to practically force them to, you know, say anything at all. So anyone's going around talking about, and especially disciples, they wouldn't let their disciples talk like that either. Enough of this nonsense, this guru nonsense. They are great beings, but they don't go around bragging. Okay, sorry about that. So, right now, where are we? We did that one. Okay, now, etena, in this sort of a way, right? He's just said that the mind, the previous content of the mind, there's a bit of a jump here. Let's see if we can iron out this jump. In this way, the bhutendriyeshu, the senses and sense objects, in this way is vyakyataha, is explained. Here's the parinama again, the fourth time it's used, parinama, the transformation. But here he's not talking about the mind, because mystic powers are they are powers out there. They're underpinned by the mind. The mind underpins the mystic powers, but those powers are manifest in the world out there. And that's why Patanjali says yogis are not interested, only those whose minds, vyutana, are interested in the world out there. Okay, those whose minds are outward going, then they think these are siddhis, but the yogis don't. They're obstacles. Why are they obstacles? Because anything that drags the mind out there is an obstacle to the mind going in here and having an asmita and reflecting consciousness back to itself. That's the last thing the mind can do. That's then the mind is done. It's nothing else it can offer the Atman other than asmita's experience. That's a mental experience. Beyond that, mind then is redundant, and then the experience becomes swarupa vastanam, situated in in the autonomous self of the Atman itself, not mediated by mind. That's nirbija. All right, Kailash Maharaj, Kezea. Kailash came to Vrindavan. We had a nice meal in the Kailash treated me to a wonderful meal in Mayapur Vrindavan restaurant. Then here our old friend Kailash. Okay, so now, okay, so now so he's going to explain now the transformation out there of the bhuta. Bhuta is the sense objects. Everything out there are sense objects. Your trees, your chairs, your tables, the sky, planets. They're bhuta. They are made of gross elements. And indriya are the senses through which you perceive them. And some of you know Sankhya, you have Gyan Indriyas and Karma Indriyas. But really, mostly this Gyan Indriyas, the five senses that through which you attain Pratyaksha Pramana, you attain knowledge, the five, sensual knowledge of sight, sound, etc. And these are knowledge of bhutas, right? So if you smell something, the object of smell is a bhuta, it's an object. You hear something, that's also bhuta. And if you know your Sankhya, there's 5 Mahabhutas. On your list of your Sankhya, you got, the 25 things like a family tree. I'm sure you've seen it at the back of your yoga books, right? Have we not seen it? We've all seen it. So what's the last thing on the list? On the far right is the Mahabhutas, the great bhutas. The bhuta is a sense object, and it's usually listed as, earth, water, fire, air, ether, which sounds very primitive and medieval, but what are they really saying? Who translates it? Who translated it that way? Some 19th century Indologist. What are they really saying? They're saying that there are solids, and there are liquids, and there are gases, and we might prefer to use those terms to make it a little bit more relatable to our modern physics. And then there are, gases, and of course, ether. We no longer believe in ether. They used to believe in ether. I don't know. Newton believed in ether, but it was disproved. You never know. Might make a comeback. So these are the bhutas. So the bhutas, and then how do you know there are bhutas? How do you know there are sense objects? If you didn't have any senses, you wouldn't be aware of any objects. You're only aware of the world out there because you see it, smell it, touch it, taste it, and hear it. If you're deprived of those 5 things, you would have no ability to know the world out there. And that's what Patanjali calls Pratyaksha Pramana in verse 1 in verse 7. How do you know something? 3 ways. One is through the senses. The second is through inference predicated on the senses. And the third is information transmitted in words. Right, now, the sense objects, dharma, lakshana, avastha, state, characteristics, state, and condition of objects. So things have a dharma. The dharma, they have a nature. Now we know dharma from the Bhagavad Gita, and the word dharma is used in terms of your duty. So if you're a brahmana, your dharma is to teach, perform Vedic rituals. If you're a warrior, your dharma is to protect. If you're a Vaisya merchant, your dharma is to engage in equitable trade and in cow protection and in land owning or land holding. If you're a Sudra, your dharma is to do, arts and crafts and various forms of labor. So the Gita, so everyone has a combination of these gunas. And they lend themselves naturally and happily and comfortably to a particular dharma. If you're doing someone else's dharma, Krishna says about Arjuna, better you do your own dharma imperfectly than someone else's perfectly. You can't be happy in your nature if you're stuck doing some dharma that's not your dharma. So your particular mind in this birth, the gunas of your mind, the gunas of your body, lend themselves to particular dharmas. If you're, you're activist, you're impelled to sort of defend the downtrodden, and you're a warrior. You might get into politics and try to change laws. If you're a Brahmin and and you're according to your dharma, you see the nature of what is the cause of problems differently. A Brahmana type person sees the cause of the problems, a lack of education, lack of knowledge. A warrior sees the cause of the problems, a lack of access to political power. A merchant type person sees the problems, lack of economic access to economics. So according to your gunas, you see the world differently. Okay, so that's how the word dharma, we're used to it because we all read the Gita and we know that karma yoga is nothing other than doing your dharma without attachment to the fruit. Karmani evadikaraste ma paleshu. Right, but everything has a dharma. The chair you're sitting on has a dharma. Its dharma is to support your body. The dharma of the chair is not to, I don't know, it's not to dig a hole in your garden. That's the dharma of a spade. So objects have dharma. Dharma is everything everything that emerges from the guna has a function, has a purpose to be there. Nothing's random. There's no random universe. There's no randomness. There's no blind watchmaker. Richard Dawkins is going to have a heart attack. Right. Now, so the dharma of water is liquidity. It's nature. The dharma of fire is, luminosity. So, material things have dharmas. They have a nature specific to them. Part of our problem in the Kali Yuga, my friends, if I just take a moment, because I often have students say, well, I don't know what my dharma is. Part of our problem in this age, the Kali Yuga, one of the symptoms is that people don't have a clue what their dharma is. Also because the gunas are all weird and confused. And in the first chapter of Gita, I know we think negatively of caste. Well, caste is negative if you're forced into a caste by birth. And because you're born a Brahmin, you can stick your nose up at everybody else. That's negative. Or if you're born a Sudra, you have no access to sacred knowledge. That's negative. But if you take your dharma according to your nature, then that's a very good thing. I mean, who doesn't want to feel they're doing their dharma in the world? I mean, students have no meaning. Meaning means they don't feel like they fit. They don't feel like they have they don't have a, they don't fit in the world. They don't have a meaningful way of being in the world. Now that's because we have to discover our dharma. And the problem with Kali Yuga is everything's a bit mixed up. We don't even have a dharma. The gunas are all crazy. Everything's whacked out. And so even if we look for a dharma sincerely, it's not a given that we actually have a clear dharma. It's not actually clear that we have a clear nature. So you could be a bit of a Brahmin, bit of a Kshatriya, a bit of a businessman, do a bit of this, bit of that, and okay, that's fine. You're a Renaissance sort of person, but you don't have any peace of mind. You're not sort of grounded in a clear kind of, this is in this life. This is meaning. This is what I do. That my nature lends itself. When I do this, I'm content. I'm sad. Nothing to do with yoga, by the way, just simply the dharma. So things have a dharma in this verse, right? He's not talking about now Bhagavad Gita dharma. He's talking about bhuta indriya, the objects, and they have a lakshana. A lakshana, I have to just, lakshana is a kind of a state. The state that they're in, and the dharma lakshana, and a vasta is whether it's past or, it's a little bit vague, this. And if you'll forgive me, I'll, when we meet next week, I'll just refresh my mind. I wrote this, gosh, well over 10 years ago. I can't even remember when. And let me just look up one of them is, the dharma of a thing, the nature of a thing. It can be old or new. And it's not, I was puzzled over, I didn't feel the commentators really, I didn't get a clear sense of what's going on in the sutra. I'll be perfectly honest. And I really studied the comment when I wrote this thing. I studied it intensely, and I kind of struggled a bit and I wonder whether the commentators, because it's leading up to the mystic powers, and they don't really say much about the mystic powers. I wonder whether the commentators are a little bit uncomfortable with it as well, but maybe that's just me. So the dharma is the nature, the fundamental, raison d'etre of a thing. The lakshana is its state, and they talk about newness and oldness and whether it's new or old. But let me refresh my mind, and next week we'll pop back and have a better look at this. And avastha is past and present. But what's the point? The point is a thing has a dharma which can change. From the past into the future, can be old and new, and it can be past and present. Okay, what's the dharmin? The dharma, the dharmin is the possessor of the dharma. So an in suffix is something possesses. So a yogin, we've all heard that when we say that men are yogis, a yogi is the nominative singular of yogin. We haven't done that yet in our Sanskrit class. So the yogin or the yogini is the possessor of yoga. The one who possesses something is in, if they're male, which becomes e in the nominative singular, and ini if it's female. So if I have a book, pushtaka, I own it, so I'm the pushtakin. That's the stem of the noun. If I put that in the nominative singular, the pushtakin becomes pushtaki. Have you noticed sometimes it's written yogi, sometimes yogin? Have you noticed? They're both correct. Yogin is the stem, yogi is nominative singular. Tess, if you were doing our Sanskrit, you'd be nodding your head and saying, I know that. But the female is going to be yogini. Okay, so therefore, what's the dharmin? We know what the dharma is. The dharma is the characteristic, quality, nature of something, but the thing that possesses it is the dharmin. And the next verse is about the dharmin. It's hang in there, my friends. We're going to get to the mystic powers. We need to do a little bit metaphysical groundwork. This is chapter 3. It's a little technical. Hang in there. Okay, what's the dharmin? The dharmin, it is the anupati. It's a substratum. Shanta udita vyapadesha. The dharmin underpins past, present, and future. So the dharmin is that which bears the dharma, whether the quality. The dharmin is, okay, let's think about the atman. The atman is the dharmin. What's the quality of the atman? Chitti Shakti. Chetana, consciousness. So consciousness is the quality, but a quality has to be grounded in something, so it's grounded in the dharmin. The dharmin is the atman. The quality of the atman is Chitti Shakti, not double T, not chitta with two T's, one T, chit. Okay? So the atman is the dharmin, and the quality of the dharmin, the quality of the atman, what qualities does it have? Sat. It has chit. Its real quality is chit, also known as Chitti Shakti, also known as Chaitana. That's the quality. If you have a quality, according to most, Hindu metaphysics and philosophy and Aristotle, qualities have to be grounded in a substance. If we say red, it's not like red's floating about in abstract space. It's something is red, a red car, a red shirt. So the quality of red has to be grounded in a substratum. Likewise, that's how we know there's an atman. How do we know there's an Atman? Well, if you are Vedantin, you read the Upanishads tell you that's good enough for you. Yeah, okay. Upanishads say I'm an Atman, that's fine. I'm happy with that. If you're a Patanjalian, you do Chitta Vritti Nirodha, Chata Drashtu, then you experience for yourself. But what about somebody who is not so happy just believing in the Vedanta and hasn't done enough yoga to experience it? What about someone that hasn't done any yoga and, doesn't reject the Upanishads, but he's not just going to believe it because it's written in some Upanishad? How does that person know the Atman? Well, reason, Anumana, this is Nyaya, the school of Nyaya. And how do they reason it? They say, you have a quality of consciousness. It's a quality. You know it. You don't need to prove it. You're conscious. Even Descartes said the only thing he knows is he's conscious. Do you remember Descartes? Everybody knows it. Cogito ergo sum. How do I know I am? Cogito, because I'm conscious. So you can't deny that. You can deny the world out there. You can't deny you're conscious. So the logicians say, consciousness has to be grounded in something. Consciousness is the Dharma. Now let's connect it to the Sutra. And that's a quality. Qualities have to be grounded in the substance. And the substance is the Dharmin, the possessor of the quality. Okay? Don't worry if you didn't get all of that. I feel like I'm yelling. That's the weird thing about Zoom, you feel like you're yelling. Probably because I am yelling. Okay, so now let's go back here. Now, so there's a Dharmin, the substratum, right? Okay, here let's use the lovely Upanishads. Come on, Upanishads to the rescue. Chandogya. Shvetaketu, my son. Take this clay, my son. From this clay, you make plates, you make cups, you make clay objects. But my son, it's nothing other than clay. So the clay is the Dharmin, and the qualities are the dharmas. And there's 3 verses. Take this take this gold, my son. Right? Shvetaketu is a famous student. Well, from this you make trinkets, my son. You make earrings and you make bracelets. But my son, it's nothing other than gold. And remember from Sankhya, everything is nothing other than the 3 gunas. So all qualities, all evil, you have to understand this to understand the mystic powers. It's all connected to the mystic powers. They're not powers at all. They're subtle physics. You're going to get down to the substratum. If your mind can pervade the substratum, you can pervade the objects that emerge from it. If you have a lump of clay, you can make a cup, but then you can squish it back into the clay and make something else. Is that a mystic power? Nothing mystical about it at all. You've simply rearranged the substratum. If you understand that, you'll understand the metaphysics of the siddhis. That's why Patanjali's talking like this. Okay? So he wants us to understand the notion that there is a substratum. And if you can penetrate the substratum, a physicist would say that. It would say, if you can, here is a book, if I can rearrange the subatomic structure of it, I could, like let's say you had some kind of a laser, you can dissolve it or burn it, or, there's no reason. You wouldn't be surprised, probably, if some scientist makes some ray and rearranges the atoms, and then this becomes something else. That's not beyond, right? Kailash is a physicist in his secular life. It wouldn't be a massive shock, because we know this is made of subatomic particles and forces. So in principle, you can rearrange those subatomic particles and forces and make something else. What's magical about that? Yoga is going to say, more subtle than subatomic particles and forces is mind stuff. That remember what comes out of the 3 gunas? Buddhi. Look at your chart. Before our next class, my friends, you have an assignment, every one of you. Look at that chart. If you don't have it in the back of your book, go online. Sankhya chart. You've got Purusha, and then you have Prakriti. And then Prakriti, there's 25. And I bet you've just looked at it all these years. All these years have been stuck in the back of your book. and it sounds very medieval, doesn't it? You got Gyanindriyas, Karmindriyas, you got legs and arms, and you think, oh my God, what am I supposed to sign off on this lot? But it's just not been presented properly, my friends. Look at the chart and pay attention to what comes out of what. The first thing that comes out of the three gunas is buddhi, intelligence. That means intelligence pervades all grosser objects that manifest from it. I'm going to say that again. You look at your chart. Eleonora, can we have a chart for next week, please? Eleonora is really great, and she does wonderful service, and she's always on hand, and I'm much obliged. From
I'm on it.
yeah, you're on it. Great. Even now, if you have it, what's the first thing that comes out of the three gunas? Buddhi. Then out of buddhi comes ahankara. And then out of that come the tanmatras. And out of them come the mahabhutas. What does that mean? It means buddhi is underpinning everything. Just like physicists would say, subatomic particles underpin everything. Then they come together into whatever, neurons, and they come together into, right? So what that means is, if the yogi's buddhi, our buddhi is trapped in our bodies because of karma. We're trapped. But what if a very advanced yogi is not trapped by those bonds of karma because he's burnt them, right? Kriya yoga, klesha tanu. You burn it by doing kriya. Even Patanjali says, earlier on, he says that. So, no, yogis are not Buddhists. So, because yogis believe in an eternal, independent, autonomous Atman, and Buddhists don't. Buddhists believe in a momentary, interdependent Atman. They have different notions of consciousness. So, but their practices may be similar. So I'm just responding to the chat. So, therefore, I'm going to say this, and then we're going to read. It's important to get this. This is a map for understanding the cities. If you're not confined by your kleshas into this body, there's nothing stopping your buddhi penetrating into the buddhi substructure of all reality. And if you do that, you can then control the densifications of buddhi. Each step of that chart is a densification, sattva becoming more and more tamas until it ends up at the final mahabhuta, which is earth, which is the most tamasic of all. You can look at that Sankhya chart in many different ways. One of the ways you can look at it is sattva becoming increasingly tamasified. Obviously, rajas is also involved in that process of transformation. I think we could stop there, because we start. Okay, we'll go up to 16. That's the first siddhi, right? So we need to know. Okay, we do one more verse. So there's a dharmin underpinning the dharmas. There is a substratum underpinning qualities, and the cause of change. The cause of change of the sequence, the change in the sequence of characteristics is the cause of change in transformation of objects. You can transform an orange into an apple because your mind can penetrate the substructure of the orange, which is really a densification of buddhi. Your mind can merge into the buddhi substructure of the orange and rearrange its sequencing, and the orange becomes an apple. I'm going to leave that there before Kailash has a heart attack. Is a physicist, but hopefully he might be open to thinking about it, and at least not a priori rejecting it out of hand. Because physics is doing some pretty far out stuff nowadays. Okay, did any of that make sense?
Do you want to look at the chart?
Yes. Can you bring it up? Right, here's our little charts. We've seen them, but we never paid much attention to them, did we? let's forget about these. He's talking about the indriyas. Okay. Now, what comes out when the Prakriti is stirred? What stirs it is a question Vedanta is interested in. They're going to say there must be an Ishvara to stir it in the first place. Like Big Bang, what triggered the Big Bang? There must be something external to the Big Bang to trigger it. If the trigger is internal, it would always be banging. If the trigger was internal to it, then why did it trigger at that particular moment that we call 14 billion years ago? So, but that's a Vedanta discussion. Let's not get sidetracked. Once it activates because Rajas activates it. The question is what activates Rajas, but that's a Vedanta question. It stirs. So think about milk. You stir it, and then you get yogurt. You stir it some more, it gets denser and denser. You get butter. You stir it some more, and let's say you get toffee. I know you don't, but pretend you do. So you see how by the stirring of something, it becomes progressively grosser. So buddhi then is intelligence, and it becomes ego, which then goes, forget about the left-hand side for now, and then it goes and becomes the 5 qualities, but and those 5 qualities are grounded in substances, and each one is grosser, 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 grosser. Earth is the most gross. But that means that buddhi is actually underpinning everything. Even though these things, so you can think of ahankara as densified buddhi. Or, the sattvas has more, it's got more tamas in it. The tamas component increases. But what it means is buddhi could, in principle, that pure sattva, if it breaks out of its karmic confinement, can penetrate the substructure of any of these things. Let's say you have an object made of earth, water, fire, air. Let's just say made of solids, liquids, make it sound a little bit more modern. If mind stuff underpins the gross elements, then that mind stuff can rearrange the characteristics. It can rearrange those elements and make an orange into an apple. And we'll look at this again next week. Eleonora, thank you very much. My voice is a bit hoarse because I'm yelling. And there's something about Zoom. I never yell like this. Do I yell like this? And I never yell like this in in-person workshops.
You do a little bit, Edwin.
Thank you, Tess. It's good to have you in my corner. Okay. All right, my friends. Any questions?
I had one. Samskara, Britis come from samskaras, right?
Yeah.
So where do we get the Nirodha samskara from?
Where did we get what?
The Nirodha samskara from? Meaning we had that experience before in order to bring it up?
Well, we have nirodha samskaras. Like, for example, if you're on a diet and you're tempted to eat something, and then it's really willpower. It's really yatna. It's just it's a function of the mind that can control itself. So we have nirodha in so many ways. If you're an athlete, you have to have nirodha of so many things. If you're a mother, you have to have nirodha so many things to protect you don't go out partying. And I mean, we all do nirodha in so many different ways. So we have that potential of one part of the mind to control another part of the mind. Sometimes we talk about buddhi control. Remember the analogy of the chariot, and the mind are the reins and the driver is the intelligence. So the driver has the ability to control the mind in all sorts of ways. So we do that in mundane life in many different ways. So yoga is just an extension of that. We have a different sort of goal, and so it's a type of samskara, I guess, coming from willpower, which is also samskara.
Okay, but we don't do it well. usually. And then we are talking about Nirodha, Nirodhing Vrittis, all
Yeah.
of them.
Yeah. So therefore, there's a samskara that is overriding other samskaras. And you know, we do it in mundane life, and there's an extension of that, and an absolute extension of that, because the Nirodha samskara has not just nirodhing a particular kind of tapas is also nirodhing. That's what tapas is. You're nirodhing your desires. That's tapaha. So Patanjali takes it to the extreme and says, okay, you have practiced nirodhing various things even in mundane life. Here's my proposal: nirodha everything, see what happens. And that's chitta-vritti nirodha. So it's just a samskara like any other samskara. Well, not like it, but it has a certain function.
And how is that temporary? And then you can come back.
How
Even
is
deciding to be a Shiva Mukta, I mean.
because once your karma is activated in this life, you burnt up all your you have a lot of karma lying in storage that gets burnt. So you don't have any past samskaras waiting for the next life. You're not making fresh samskaras, but you do have samskaras. Remember Patanjali says, Jatiya desha, Jatiya bhoga. So once it's activated in this life, it has to play out. So therefore, you have to, if you're going to die at 60, you're going to die at 60, whether you're Jivan Mukta or you're not a Jivan Mukta. You become enlightened at 40, but your ayur, the three things that is karma, jati, ayur, bhoga, your ayur is still going to be 60. You become enlightened at 40, you got 20 years to live. And things will happen to you. You might get a disease, or you might inherit $1 million. That doesn't change the already activated karma.
And how are you?
Let's let others have a chance. Faustin.
Thank you, Professor Brian. I apologize in advance. With this very basic question, pretty new to this. Now, where would that first samskara come from? Like, if it's a past impression, like, what about the one before that? So if you take it all the way back,
it's a vicious cycle. You can't go there. You can't go there. So they just say anadi. They say it's beginningless, because if you identify a first samskara, then you have to say, where does it come from? Which is what you just said. So to avoid that, they would say the Atman is eternal, and it's eternally been. This is not satisfying. I'm not saying it's a satisfying answer, but the answer you will receive is that it is anadi, beginningless. Because if you say that this samskara is caused by a past life samskara, you just run into an infinite regress. That samskara must be caused by that's another one and another one and another one. Are these your two boys?
Yeah, they are.
Namaskar. What are the names?
Ethan.
Aiden.
Ian?
Aiden.
Sorry?
Yeah, this is Aiden over here.
Aiden.
Aiden.
Okay.
And this is Ethan.
Ethan and Aiden. And namaskar. Are you interested in yoga philosophy for the boys?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting.
Interesting. You go to high school?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm going to high school.
He's going to grade 9, and he's
where do you live? Where do you live?
We live in Ottawa, in Canada.
Oh God, I was going to say, if you lived in New Jersey, come and sit in on our Hindu Phil. But
I will email you. We started following you
nice
a couple of
to meet
years
you all.
ago.
But that's a good question, and they don't like the idea. You say the Christian idea that the first samskara comes when you took a bite of the apple, and then you get thrown out, and which satisfies, because we like cause and effect. We have cause and effect kind of thinking. If there's an effect, we want to identify a cause, and that's just the way that our minds work. And it's impossible for us to think of something that's causeless, because if something's eternal, then it has no cause, because it's eternal. So a cause means a finite moment in time when you have a cause that produces an effect. But if you have something that's eternal, then you don't have a primordial cause or a first samskara, and that's very unsatisfying. So I think when they say anadi, the way I interpret that, and that's just me, they're just saying there's certain things that our minds, which are bound by space and time and cause and effect, there's certain things we just can't answer. Whatever your model is, if you're a materialist, physicist and you have a Big Bang, that's it. That's your foundational truth. Any kind of metaphysics has to have a foundational truth, a stop sign, and that is the cause of causes. And you can't say, well, where does that cause come from? Because that's your foundational truth. Whether it's a God, whether it's an infinitely dense moment that precedes the Big Bang, whether it's eternal flux of matter, you at some point you just have to say something is, and that's your foundational truth. And that's it. Just sat, it just is, and you can't avoid that in any human proposal. Any metaphysical, philosophical, theological proposal has to have a foundational truth. You can't get away from that. So for the yoga and Vedanta, Atman is eternal, and therefore you can't go chasing a samskara back, because you go back to infinity. So the Buddha just said, the Buddha had a very good answer to this. He said, if someone shoots you with an arrow, it's no good asking, what kind of wood was the arrow made from, who made it, which village, what was his caste. You can't answer how it came to be, but you can put an end to it. Pull out the arrow. Something may be beginningless, but it may have an end. So samsara may be beginningless, and we can't really come up with a good explanation because we can't think in terms of beginninglessness, but it can have an end, and that's yoga.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Professor.
Thank you, Faustin. Thank you, Faustin. Wasn't Faustin? Didn't he murder someone, cut someone's head off? Who am I thinking of?
I think you're thinking Dr. Faustus.
Yeah.
I didn't murder anybody.
You look like a great Vedic rishi, so definitely not you. Okay, Prashant.
Thank you.
Yeah, take care.
Namaskaram, Edwin ji.
Namaste.
Thank you so much again. So the question is, he seems to in the sutras he says, he combines dharana, dhyana, and samadhi into and calls it as samyama, and then in 3.8 he says tadapi bahiranga nirbijasya. So does it mean that he's saying that you have to, there are these eight limbs, and then you have to go beyond this, and that's when nirbija happens? Is that what is the meaning of that?
Oh, we missed it. We missed that one. Didn't we miss it? I don't remember reading that. Which one was that?
3.38.
Oh, yeah, we missed
Tadapi
it.
bahirangam nirbijasya.
Yeah. So these three are internal compared to the previous ones, because they're internal, but they're external compared to nirbija because they're mental states, and the mind is external to consciousness. So the mind is internal compared to the five, yamas and all of that. The mind activity is internal compared to them, but the mind is still a covering of consciousness. So therefore, it's an external sheath from the point of view of nirbija, which is svarupa vastanam, which is consciousness itself. And we somehow skipped over that. So thank you very much for that. If we ever skip over, my friends, do let us know. Thank you, Prashant ji. And Kailash Mahanji.
Thank you, Edwin. Thank you. Just nice. So I missed all your previous. Is a personal question. I missed all the other classes because I was in Germany. So the timing was in the middle of the night there. But I just joined now. I found that I had bought your book long time ago. I bought this book yours, which is there still. So you covered, which one should I read before the next class? So
Well, it's up to you if you want to read, or you can just go on the website and download the videos of 1 and 2.
Oh, okay.
So you go into edwinbryant.org and you go into the video link, and then there's loads of stuff there. But look for the Yoga Sutra, because there's other things like Vedanta and so forth. And then you can, if you want to, you can, or else you read the book. It depends on how you work best.
No, I prefer your talking. Yes. So yes.
The book is, okay. Whatever works, Kailash ji.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. And Piyush ji. Piyush's gone off for a cup of tea. Rhonda.
So
Hi,
sorry,
Rhonda.
sorry.
Go ahead, Rhonda.
Oh, okay. Yeah, first of all, I just wanted to say thank you so much for this. So this is just so important because this part is hard to understand and you're really bringing some highlight to it. So thank you. And then also, I just wanted to say, when you were talking about trying to find the beginning out of the beginning list and this and that, is this the same thing kind of like what we do with our Christian faith here is the story of Adam eating the apple
Yeah.
from Eve. So that is like the beginning of the problems.
Yeah,
Just
but
an example of them trying to, because everyone is like, when did sin start?
Sure, it's like that, yes.
Okay.
It's the same thing, right? How did we end up suffering here? Well, Adam disobeyed God. God said, don't eat of the tree of knowledge. And then Adam did. And of course, the woman got blamed. He said it was Eve that did it. So ever since then, women get blamed for everything. And so we're trying to push back on that now. But that's where it comes from. And then they get cast out. And from a Hindu point of view, that's incomprehensible because for several reasons. Number one, why should we inherit the karma? They would think of it in terms of karma. Obviously, that's how they think. That's how they would think, and I think that way too. So why should we inherit the karma of a deed done by somebody else? They would think that's fundamentally unjust. And given our legal systems anywhere in the world, in any society, a person doesn't inherit. I mean, maybe some societies you inherit the sins of the father. I don't know. But the most legal systems, you're responsible for your behavior and you can't transmit that to someone else. So they would say, number one, that's inherently unjust, that we all have to suffer because of the deeds of Adam. They would say, no, we suffer because of our own deeds. And then, well, how come people are born in different conditions? They as a starting place, they start off differently. How do you explain that? And they would say, well, then there must be a past life. It's one of the reasons they posit a past life is because of the inequalities of the very first instance of birth. So therefore, someone's just born, they haven't done anything. So why is one baby born in one condition, another baby born in another condition? So that's one of the ways, at least the logicians infer, well, everything is cause and effect. So if birth is an effect, then the cause must have preceded it. Therefore, there must be a previous birth. So that's the Hindu way of thinking, number one. And the number two, in the Bible, God creates Adam, right? He takes a bone or whatever, and he creates Eve out of a bone from Adam's rib cage, and he gets earth and he breathes into the earth, and that's how Adam is created. And the Hindus, Buddhists, Jains, I mean, Indian way of thinking generally, if you create something, you can destroy it. If something can be created, then it can be uncreated, and therefore they would not accept the creation of the soul, ex nihilo, from nothing, ex nihilo. So they would have a problem with that. But they certainly have a bigger problem with the karma, the idea that somebody else did something and you're inheriting that sin. But yes, if your question is fundamentally, irrespective of the back and forth, fundamentally, it's an attempt to understand human suffering. Why do we suffer? Because that's the real question that everyone's trying to figure out in their different ways, science, philosophy, theology. Why are we suffering? And the Christian way is ultimately because of Adam, original sin, and that's why Jesus came. Jesus came to absolve us of that original sin. That's God comes and he's crucified in a sense to remove that sin, and all of that's very strange to an Indian way of thinking, just as Hinduism is strange to a Christian way of thinking. But we've heard a lot about Christian critiques of Hinduism. I think sometimes it's fair if we hear a little something about Hindu critiques of Christianity, and one of them would be that's fundamentally unfair to you have somebody else's karma, as they would say, dumped on the whole of humanity forevermore. Number one, they find it strange that God needs to come down and be crucified in order to remove that sin. They would say, well, if he wants to remove it, just remove it. Why does he have to come down? And it's obviously Christianity has a very rich theology. I'm not in any way, but if you look at it superficially from the outside, it seems strange, just as Hinduism, Kali and Krishna and the gopis, it seems strange if one looks at it superficially from the outside. So I just wanted, I know I've taken your question in a direction you didn't intend, but sometimes it's good to look at our tradition from an outside lens, because then we realize things we take for granted maybe seem strange to somebody else. And it also helps us not make judgments about things we don't understand about other traditions. But yeah, fundamentally, the problem of human suffering.
Right. And along with that, I mean, having been raised in the Christian religion, but the confusion of even the blood sacrifice of Christ on the cross. But I feel like I understand that a whole different way by the rituals of sacrifice in other religions and in the Hindu religions, and how important it almost in one say, well, we're going to up you one, and we have the blood of the Son of God versus you guys are shedding the blood and and imitating a blood sacrifice in different ways with different things. So that's real interesting to me too, of how that scenario all kind of came about, because it seems back in the day, they all kind of had this same sacrificial importance of some sort.
Yeah. There's sacrifices there. I mean, most of the ancient world, the sacrifices are to please celestial beings. So that was Greco-Roman traditions and the Germanic traditions. You sacrifice to get the gods on your side, and same in Mesoamerican. And so mostly that sacrifice in anthropology and in Vedic and would have been the animals are sacrificed, and it's not connected. It's to please the gods. But yeah, it's all very interesting. Rhonda, and you are now a mix of you've got all these Christian samskaras in your mind, you've got all these Hindu samskaras, and the rest of your life you're going to be negotiating and just seeing what fits, what doesn't fit, and let's hope at the moment of death, all of that together, that you at least at the moment of death, you cling to the feet of Bhagavan, you cling to the feet of whether that's Jesus, but you cling to the feet of something higher, and that's really that's the grand finale. If we can do that, if all of our studies and our cultures and our backgrounds, if at the moment of death it all comes together for us, what does that mean? Is that we grasp hold of the feet of the Supreme Being.
Yes.
We can all
I'm
agree
going
on
to
that.
remain curious for that moment.
Well, at the moment of death, if you're
Open and
curious,
curious.
okay. Well, many more conversations to come. Let's give Tim. Let's see what Tim has a question there. Thank you, Rhonda.
Hey, I'm sorry if this question is already answered in the book, but and if it is, you can just tell me, or you can refer me to some other ancient texts if it's talked about well, but I'm kind of confused, and I keep coming back to this over time, and about how the five gross elements, what the process is, specifically as far as how those conceptually would evolve, like how we can conceive of those as evolving from the gunas.
Well, we can say one way of thinking of it is let's just look at the Mahabhutas. It's easy to answer. The tamas component increases from ether to air to water to fire to water to earth. So as the tamas component increases, it gets thicker and denser, because the characteristic of tamas is density, solidity, and you can think of it as as a sattva to tamas kind of evolution, with rajas, the energy that powers the change. You can think of it that way. You can think of it as a densification or a tamasification of the gunas. Tamas becomes more and more prominent the further down you go the list on the chart, and the further back you go, the sattva is there. So buddhi is very, very sattvic. Even though Krishna says in the Gita there's buddhi and there's rajasic buddhi and sattvic buddhi and tamasic buddhi, but it's sattva. So there's sattva, tamas sattva, rajas sattva, but the nature of buddhi itself, you can't even see it. It's imperceptible, right? You can't see it. You have a mind because you think, but it's so subtle you can't perceive it with the senses. What to speak of seeing the Atman? You can't even see the mind with the senses. So therefore that means it's more subtle, and subtlety is a characteristic of sattva. So the closer you get to Prakriti, the more sattvic you get. The closer you get to the earth, the more tamas component is increased. Now, one thing I'm struggle with is that, I used to think of Prakriti as having these three qualities, and somehow or other they were interacting and negotiating. And Krishna says, when sattva is manifest and rajas and tamas are, at bay, and then they're always competing. Right now, and I may change, but right now I don't think of it so much as three different things. I think of it as one thing with three latent potentials. So Prakriti has these three qualities, and they may be latent, they may be active, they may all be active, they may be interacting. Just like, for example, fire has two qualities. It has heat and luminosity. So it has these two qualities, and sometimes the heat is more, and sometimes there's no heat, but there's luminosity. But it's sort of coming from I don't know if that's a good example, but let's go with it for now. So there's Prakriti. It has these three. Guna just means qualities or properties. And the fact that one isn't manifest doesn't mean it's not there. It's just latent. So in between the creative cycles, right? Because there's there's creation and there's dissolution. There's a long period of inaction. The gunas are in equitension, meaning that the creative energy of rajas is being suppressed by tamas. So they're all potential. But in between creative cycles, it's, I guess, tamas is dominant because tamas is suppressing everything else. And that's the best I can do. Do you want to push that bit further?
No, that's really useful, actually, but that's really helpful, thinking of it in that way. But would it be accurate, do you think, would you say, within this system, to say that the so-called elements of space, wind, fire, etc., that those don't exist, in a sense, more fundamentally than the mind, outside of minds?
Well, it's not it's a realist philosophy. So there's a real world out there, and if there's a real world out there, then that real world must consist of some metaphysical stuff. So therefore, there's stuff that's out there that's independent of the mind. This is not Vijnanavad Buddhism is more of this sort of meant that nothing exists outside of the mind. That's a school of Buddhism. You don't have that in the Vedika schools, although Advaita Vedanta sort of gets heads in that direction, because Advaita Vedanta says the world is fundamentally unreal, but even the mind is unreal in Advaita Vedanta. So Advaita Vedanta is not saying that the world is a construct of the mind, because the constructing mind itself is also unreal. So Advaita Vedanta says everything's unreal, but then of course it runs into the problem of explaining, well, what is unreality? What is this Maya? But other than Advaita Vedanta, there's a real world out there. The other schools are realists. So Sankhya, Yoga, Vaisheshika, Mimamsa, there's a real world out there. And if there's a real world out there, then the job of the metaphysician is to figure out, well, what's it made of then? And so the Sankhya metaphysician, it's like a process of the Sankhya metaphysician would say everything is an inference. So they would say something like this, and I'm reconstructing this. Okay, this is, but I'm operating within the study of Sankhya tradition. So you're basically sitting down and you're looking. Let's say we're sitting down, we're looking out the window, right? So there's a world out there, and we notice qualities. So we say the trees are green. That's the quality of greenness. The shape. That these are qualities. There's form. There's texture. There's sounds. There's smells. So let's just call all that qualities. Sometimes they say there's 17 qualities like Nyaya, 24. It doesn't matter, because fine. It doesn't matter. 17, 24 basic fundamental qualities. So now then they would say, okay, that's what we know. We perceive qualities. But then they would say, okay, but those qualities they have to be grounded in something. Otherwise, green would be universal green. If it wasn't, what makes the tree green but not the fence green? So therefore, these qualities are they're limited. They have limitations, right? So if they weren't grounded, they would be all pervading. These qualities would be all pervading, but they're not all pervading. They're, my tree is green, but next to it is a bush with pink flowers, and the pink is in the flowers. So therefore, it must be grounded. So they say, what's it grounded in? And then they would say, well, there must be, ultimate subatomic particles that somehow correspond. Even today, actually, they don't know. They haven't quite figured out the relationship between subatomic particles and qualities. In other words, pink and touch and smell, what's that got to do with the basic elemental table of physics? And they haven't quite figured out that connection, but that's a modern problem. So it's a modern problem. But anyway, Sankhya would say, okay, so the leaf is green, but the flower isn't. So I get my leaf, it's green, but I can rip it apart. Okay, so I can make it smaller. I can rip my leaf into 100 pieces and take each of those pieces, rip it. Now, the Buddhists would say you can keep on doing that forever. But the Hindus would say, no, there must be a stop sign. There must be some fundamental irreducible particle that you can't break down anymore. Because if you could do that infinitely, then everything would have the same, that you couldn't account for size then, because everything would have infinite reducible subatomic particles. So there must be the fact that tree is big and the other one is small. There must be its ultimate ingredients that must have more of them than the other one, and therefore there must be these. So through various processes of inference, they come up with the idea that there are these. Eventually, you get to irreducible particles. Okay, so now you've got your Mahabhutas, and why do you have 5? Because you have 5 basic kinds of qualities. You have 5 senses. And so they say, okay, these 5 kinds of very different things. These, sound is very different from smell, very different from. So they're very different things. So they must be grounded in very different kinds of subatomic particles. So they come up with the 5 Mahabhutas. Now, the next thing is, well, I must have some instruments to perceive them. The fact that they're out there, how is it that I am able to be conscious of the world out there in 5 different sorts of ways? So therefore, I must have 5 pieces of equipment, and each one is connected to its object. My eyes can only see, they can't hear. So I must have an ocular faculty that perceives, that accounts for a perception, but I must have 5 different kinds of what the Sankhya chart's going to say, indriyas. Vedanta's going to say shaktis. You can call them indriyas, you can call them shaktis, or you can call them pranas. So, but whatever you want to call them, there must be some cognitive equipment that I have that is different from them, allows me to perceive them. So now you've got your gyan indriyas, and then this is all inference. And then you say, well, I must have an organ that filters everything, because there's so many sounds, but I'm only hearing you right now, and you're only hearing me, but actually there's the fridge is buzzing in the background, and the cars are bombing along the road. But something's blocking out unnecessary central impetus, so there must be yet another piece of equipment over and above the senses. So then they posit the mind, and in this sort of way. And then they say, well, but the mind is just sort of like a filter. It's just kind of, organizing data. Maybe it's a repository of sense imprints. but there must be a higher faculty of reason that determines what to do with it all. And then they end up with an intelligence, an instrument of. Remember, yoga doesn't talk about manas, buddhi, and ahankara. It does, but it really prefers to talk about chitta, one instrument rather than three. Doesn't matter. And then the final act of inference is that there must be something that grounds consciousness itself, because the instruments are not conscious, because the dead body has all the instruments. The dead body has its eyes and ears and nose, but they're not. The instruments are exactly the same, so the instruments can't be conscious because they're still there when you die, and various other reasons as well. And therefore, consciousness and plus, I can be conscious of two things at the same time. I can be seeing something and smelling it and touching it at the same time. So therefore, if sight was conscious, then sight would be. If the eyes were conscious, the eyes would just be seeing, but they wouldn't be hearing. So you wouldn't be able to do two things at the same time, because your eyes would be doing one thing, your ears would be doing another thing, and you couldn't combine them. But you can combine them. So there must be a combiner, and that combiner must be distinct from that which is being combined. So they go down these kinds of processes of inference, and they end up with the idea that there's an Atman, that there is consciousness which is distinct from qualities. Qualities are inanimate, they're achit, they're not conscious. Green is not conscious. Texture is not conscious, but there is consciousness. So therefore, green must be, its substance must have a particular kind of substance. Liquidity must be residing in a particular kind of substance, right? The Mahabhutas, the consciousness must be residing in a very different kind of substance, very different from all material things. So then they say, okay, it's chit. The material things are achit. They're not conscious. So there must be something in which chit is grounded, and then they posit an Atman. So it's all a process of inference. That's Sankhya, and it even says Prakriti is Anumanita. It is the inferred one. They call Prakriti, the name they give to Prakriti, right in the beginning of the Sankhya Karika, is the Anumanita, that which has been inferred, the inferred one. So if you were interested in that kind of a question, you would study. The best thing to study is the Nyaya Sutra. And you can get my very good friend Matthew Dusty has done an abridged version. He's just translated the whole Nyaya Sutra, but he has a little mini book which I recommend if you want to get just a taste of how the truths that Vedanta just tells us. And Patanjali just says, look, Chittavritti Nirodha, and experience it for yourself. Those truths, Nyaya arrives at the same truths through reason and argument. You might be interested in that. Let's take Piyush's question as our last question. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Branji. Apologies, I was there earlier. I think my mic wasn't connected properly. I just wanted to ask, with the Nirbija Samadhi, is there any point at which the yogi will attain awareness of Narayana or Ishvara as part of the kind of removing of kleshas, or is that completely a separate process?
No, when you're in a state of Nirbija, you're not aware of anything. That's why the bhaktas don't want it. Bhaktas do not want Nirbija Samadhi, because it deprives them of instruments through which they can perceive and think about and adore and love and interact with Bhagavan. So in the moksha of the Vaishnavas, the Narayaniyas, the followers of Narayan, when they leave their prakritic body, they get a Brahman body. You have to have sensual equipment, and you have to have cognitive equipment if you want to have an eternal relationship with Bhagavan. You're not merging. If you're a Vaishnava, you're not merging. It's not Advaita Vedanta. So you're a distinct individual, and Narayana is a distinct individual. So what kind of a relationship is there between them? So you get a divine body. You get your Svarupa. It could be like Vishnu's. You get a form. It might be the same as Vishnu, but you obviously don't have the same Shakti. Narayana creates infinite universes. You cannot create any universes, but you can have a form and engage in eternal seva to your beloved Bhagavan. This is why the Vaishnava, they don't want this Patanjali liberation. They're not interested in it. The Bhagavata Purana says it's hell. Why is it hell? Because you're deprived, you have no access to Bhagavan in that state. It's just pure consciousness. You're not conscious of anything. Well, that of anything includes Narayana. So a bhakta doesn't want it. If you're doing bhakti, you want your senses, you want your mind in this world, but of course you're still fixed, you're still ekagrata. Your mind is still fixed on one thing, and that's Narayana. So in that sense, there's a commonality with Patanjali in the sense that the mind is fixed on one thing, but your mind is active. You're writing about Narayana all the time. Your samskaras are Narayana, Narayana, Narayana. You think of Narayana, you speak of Narayana, you do puja to Narayana, you do japa to Narayana. This is bhakti, this is my path as well. My path is the Krishna version of that. But you don't want this nirbija. How do you get out of it? You're severed from your mind and your senses. You're in a state of infinite, eternal. Okay, it's ananda, but it's not prem. Bhaktas want prema. They don't want this Sachit Ananda Nirbija. But they pick it up along the way. But they just, but they don't linger there. They can still have a Swarupa Vastanam experience, but they don't get off the train there. They stay on the train. They want Bhagavan. So okay, they have an experience of their Atman, but they don't want to stay there for all eternity. No, 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 no. They want to have a relationship with the eternal, beautiful, wonderful lotus-eyed Bhagavan, whether that's Narayana, if that's your Ishta Devata, or Krishna, or whoever your Ishta Devata is. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. I guess the reason I asked that question is just because I've heard people say of like famous Vaishnavas like Ramanuja or Raghavendra that they have like a samadhi. So that's why I was just kind of confused between those two things.
Well, they might have a samadhi, but their samadhi is eternal union, but not a merger. It's not a union like a drop of water hitting the sea. Their samadhi is eternal beatitude, eternal, whatever their relationship with Narayan is. It could be a service, it could be whatever. They're usually in the Vaishnava, in the Sri Vaishnava tradition, the relationship is service. They just want to serve Bhagavan. They don't want to be Bhagavan. They don't want to. They want to. Bhagavan is infinitely, exquisitely beautiful, and the bliss that comes from serving Bhagavan eclipses the bliss of the Atman. It's a much greater bliss. So they don't want this little mini bliss of the Atman absorbed in its own nature. They want to be eternally in the parishad, the associates of Narayana or Vishnu or Krishna. So it depends on whether you're a theist. Do you think there's a God beyond your own Atman? If you're a Vaishnava, it's obvious that there's a God beyond your own Atman, because who created the universe? You didn't, and I didn't. And we're subject to ignorance and so forth. How can God be subject to ignorance? So there must be something higher than us. This is the Vaishnava way of thinking. So what is that entity that's higher than us? That Parama Atman. And so then you can't know it by the mind. Ramanuja, Raghavendra, Ramanuja, first verse of the Vedanta Sutra. You can't know it by the mind. It has to reveal itself to you. You can't grasp it, because God cannot be contained by you can't grasp you can grasp your own Atman, but you can't grasp Bhagavan because he's ungraspable. He's supreme. Nothing can control him or force him to manifest. Otherwise, he wouldn't be God. He'd be subject to your control. Then you become God. But you're not God, because you can't create a universe. So therefore, God cannot be grasped by your yogic virtuosity. So Ramanuja says he has to reveal himself. How does he reveal himself? Well, Narayana is a revelation, and other revelations. Bhagavata reveals Narayana as Krishna. So you read the stories of these great manifestations of Bhagavan, and then and don't think they're mythology. Because that just simply means when we say they're mythology, it just means we don't have a clue what to do with them. And we think, oh, they must be like the Greco-Roman gods. Oh, well, you know, Christ came down, the Logos, and they became mythos. Look at the origin of the word mythos. It's in contradistinction to Logos. So what's the Logos? Logos is the Christ, the Word, and also reason. And so God cannot be confined to your reason. And so therefore you think, okay, this is not reasonable that God has 4 arms. Not only is it not reasonable, it's a monster. Because monster is something with unnatural limbs grafted on. That's a monster. So you think, okay, this isn't reasonable. Well, it's not supposed to be reasonable, because why should God be subject to your reason? Why should God be subject to our reason? Of course he can't be. Not God then, is he? Or she? And why can't God have gender? If we have gender, why can't everything in this world in Prakritic has its parallel in the sub-Brahman, except there it's infinite and blissful and eternal and pure conscious, vibrant consciousness. Here it's just the gunas and tapas and tamas and temporary and subject to suffering, like Plato's shadows on the cave. So the Vaishnavas, the forms of Bhagavan, they're not myth. They're not myth. They are manifestations of that supreme Ishvara. And therefore, if you become attracted to them, you're much more interested in Paramatma than you are in your own Atman. Your own tiny little spark of consciousness. It may be Satchid and Ananda, no one's denying that. It may get you out of samsara, no one's denying that. It may take you to an eternal state of bliss, no one's denying that. But what makes you think that's the only destination? Why do we think there's a one size fits all? Who said it's one size fits all? What if the ultimate truth is multifaceted? And there are multiple different possibilities. That's why we do svadhyaya. We have to pick which you're going to take a yogic journey. Make sure you know where it's going to end up. Don't think they all end up in the same place. They never say that. This is my favorite. I always go on about this. They don't say they're going to take you to the same place. Buddhism is going to take you to a particular type of nirvana. Shankara is going to take you to another kind. Yoga another kind. Vaishnavism another kind. Read what's on your ticket before you jump on the train. Read what's on your ticket before you take a yogic journey, my friends. It'll tell you where it's going. And where's this idea it all ends up in the same place? That's 19th century. That's Yatoma Tatopat. That's Neo-Vedanta. That's Ramakrishna. None of the pre-modern schools said anything like that. So read the contract. They'll tell you. You want to do Kashmir Shavas and Shiboham. It'll take you there. You want to do Advaita Vedanta, there everything disappears, and you say it's Maya, everything's Maya. Well, it will be Maya, because you'll just be in a state of infinite, eternal bliss, and nothing else exists. You want to play with Balala Gopal for all eternity. Then you do that. That's what the Krishna Bhaktas were. You like Narayana, go for Narayana. You like majesty, Narayana's majesty. Aishvarya. That's awesome. It's awesomeness. Aishvarya, Ishvara is the one who has Aishvarya. Ishvara is that being who has Aishvarya, majesticness. And that's pretty cool. People travel all the way to the North Pole to see the Northern Lights because they're majestic and awesome. Well, imagine how awesome Narayana is then. If some atmospheric colors are that awesome, what about Narayana? What about Brahman? What about the qualities of Brahman, pure consciousness? What kind of colors and shapes and sounds are manifest in Brahman? We have no way we can't even talk about it. We just use words like Saguna Brahman. So read the contract. Clara, read the contract before you take your yogic journey. See what's on the ticket. It's written right there. Patanjali, they tell you right in the beginning. Atha yoga anushasanam, yoga's chitta vritti nirodha. He just doesn't put it down in footnotes. They tell you right in the beginning. Vedanta Sutra, etato brahma jignasu, jamadya syayataha. They tell you right in the opening verses what the contract is, where they're going to take you. So this idea that they all, it's a lazy idea. You know why it's lazy? Because then we don't have to do any work. We think, oh, it's all going to end up in the same place. I don't have to study. It doesn't matter. You take this path, that path. That works well if you're a Neo-Advaitin, but it doesn't work well if you're a Vaishnava or a Shaiva or a Shakta. They're not going to accept that. So, my friends, we'll see you next week. And Jai Sri Radhe Shyam. Have a great evening.
Edwin, you were going to give us homework.
Thank you.
Homework? Yeah. What did we say?
The chart.
What's the homework?
Didn't you say it was to look at the chart, Edwin?
I did, Tess. Yes.
Okay.
Well done. And and we'll test you. And test. We're going to ask you. We're going to quiz you.
No, please don't do that.
Since you volunteered and you made that lovely suggestion, I'm just gonna have a quick look at the chats. But good night, everybody. I'm just gonna in case there's any questions. I haven't been looking at the chats, but you can all wander off in your good time.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Edwin. Take care,
Jai Sri
everyone.
Radhe
Thank you.
Shyam. Sri Radhe Radhe Shyam. Okay, how do we use this thing here? Oh, let me stop recording. If I stop recording, is the chat's going to disappear?
No.
You sure? Okay, how do I stop? End meeting for all.
Any